So hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to Proxima. So we are back with a brand new movie on what if Naruto was special trained by the Tali Zorah for hardest exam movie. But before we start, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Now let's begin the story. Distract with clones. Wait until it's focusing on them. Rush it from behind and stab repeatedly until the thing stops beeping Dabayo. As he cut down another one of Orochimaru's metal men with the chakra spear he had picked up from a battlefield almost 3 months ago, Naruto couldn't help but wonder what had gone so wrong to lead to the situation they were in now. Where he had once been a proud member of a 100-strong ninja force, he was now one of about 30 surviving ninja. Hiding out in the caves, the metal man had been getting close to through the now rather generic and war-torn wasteland. The devastated landscape around him had been beautiful woodland in the heart of the Land of Fire a year ago, before Orochimaru's attack during the final of the Chunin exams in his home village of Konoha. According to the few survivors in the area around the Hokage Tower where Orochimaru himself had appeared, after the initial attack by Orochimaru's Sound Village and the traitorous Sand Village who had until that point been Konoha's ally, the snake Sannin had trapped the Hokage in some kind of barrier jutsu that prevented any of the Konoha genin from trying to help their leader. Naruto didn't understand all of it. He had been too busy following Kakashi Taiko's orders to try and subdue some of the Sand genin who had been in the exam at the time. But Orochimaru had supposedly been one of the Hokage's former students before being cast out of the village for illegal and deadly human experiments. Supposedly the man held a grudge since then and had been plotting Konoha's downfall for years, though this was all based on what Jiraiya said about the traitorous missing nin. The man had been on the same genin team as him after all. The rest of what happened became very difficult to understand, given the differing accounts and confusing melee that was occurring due to the invasion, but a few things were known as fact. Whether it was because he wasn't winning his little duel with the Hokage or that the invasion wasn't going according to plan, Naruto didn't know, but suddenly Orochimaru had flared his chakra to massive levels that could be felt throughout the center of Konoha, leaving some kind of summoned minions to keep the Sandaime busy. Shortly after he had done this, the skies began to darken and hell began to rain down. Initially, when meteors began to rain from the sky and slam into Konoha's buildings and streets, it was assumed it was some kind of jutsu, though admittedly one on a massive scale. But that all changed when the first shinobi to investigate the landing sites were obliterated by beams of death. From within the meteors came men of metal, armed with deadly weapons that could spell death at hundreds of meters with the accuracy that most shinobi could not match. The metal men were almost indiscriminate in their killing, Suna and Konoha ninja alike falling to their weapons. This was a turning point in the assault as the Suna shinobi quickly called a truce with Konoha to deal with the metal men and their sound ninja allies, who seemed to have expected the metal men's arrival and were quick to turn on their former allies. Luckily the sound ninja were not well coordinated or trained and the metal men were ponderous and slow, meaning that despite their armament and numbers they were relatively easy to counteract and force back. But Naruto only learned of this change in alliances after returning to the city with a defeated and badly injured Gaara and Temari, carrying Sakura over his shoulder despite his injuries, having been attacked by the same metal men after defeating Shukaku. That had truly been the end of his childhood, as he remembered back to the end of what had been the most difficult fight of his life. Flashback, he had done it, defeating Gaara when even Sasuke Teme couldn't. Even with Temari stood in between the two of them, Naruto knew the fight was over. Despite her defiance, her earlier defeat left her barely able to stand, Gaara not focusing on him at all now as the young redhead stared up in shock at his sister. "Why protect me, Temari?" "Because you are my little brother, and I will always protect you even if you don't want me to." Whilst it was a touching scene of family reconciliation that Naruto could only wish would happen to him someday, he was distracted by the shout of one of his few remaining clones, who he had gotten to free Sakura when he had defeated Shukaku. "Boss, above you." Looking up, Naruto saw what could only be a wave of meteors raining down towards them. At first he thought it might have been a jutsu by one of the Sand genin, but given how close to him they were he thought it very unlikely as they would be caught in the attack as well. His clone's shout had alerted Gaara and Temari to the meteor as well, Temari quickly moving to help Gaara up, Naruto deciding to trust his instincts and help her. They barely made it to the tree line, which encircled the devastated wasteland where he and Gaara had fought, when the meteors began to impact. The earth shook and dust filled the air, as the four of them crouched under a hasty sand barrier that Gaara was struggling to maintain, the red head shaking with exertion even as Temari whimpered next to him. 30 seconds later and the impact stopped, Naruto waiting a moment before looking out from underneath the shield. "Whatever the hell that was, Dobi, I hope you weren't the one that did that." Sasuke's voice focused Naruto on the young Uchiha, who was standing near one of the craters just inside the tree line, multiple cuts and bruises showing the boy had been stood a little too close to the meteor impact site than was advisable. Suddenly there was a popping sound, audible from where Naruto was standing, inside the crater. Sasuke turned to look into the crater even as a light humming filled the air, the Uchiha's body language turning to one of shock as a flash of light filled Naruto's vision. Flashback and Naruto didn't remember precisely what happened after that, only coming back to himself to Sakura's crying as shock set in. A pile of mangled Metalman corpses scattered across the battlefield like leaves caught in a hurricane. If that had been all of them, that might have been the end of things and life would have returned to something approaching normal. But even as the Konoha ninja mourned their dead and tried to regroup after the battle, the skyships descended, the smallest of which easily the size of a house. Luckily, the initial attack of the metal men meant that when the surviving high-ranking ninja saw the skyships descending and blackening the sky, they ordered an evacuation of Konoha rather than trying to stay and fight. He and the other rookies had been lucky that day. Naruto thought even as he jumped back into the shadows, they had been considered too injured, inexperienced to continue the fight during the evacuation, instead being sent ahead to clear an evacuation route for the civilians to follow. So when the initial bombardment had wiped the center of Konoha from the map in but a few moments, all they could do was watch in abject horror as their entire life was wiped from existence. Neji, Lee and Shino had been amongst the many who hadn't made it out of the massacre, the three of them having been being treated in the makeshift trauma centers when the attack had begun. In fact, Naruto thought bitterly as he shushined back to the cave entrance, it was easier to remember those that were still alive at this point rather than those that had perished, given that he could count those from Konoha in the group on 2 hands. Waiting a moment at the entrance whilst the seals recognized his chakra, Naruto then stepped into the cave that would soon become their temporary tomb. Even as he saw the long mane of white hair that he instantly recognized, Naruto had to bite back the indignity he felt at Jiraiya's plan, his dark side and the Kyuubi screaming at him to take the fight to the metal men to make them pay for what they had done. But the old sage had spoken the truth when he had argued against that kind of heroic final assault. The metal men's numbers seemed innumerable and even bringing down some of their skyships had no effect on their tactics. So instead, Jiraiya wanted to use the shinobi tactic of deception. The metal men seemed to be following their life signs, and from what the few surviving Auto Ninja had told them, the metal men wouldn't stop until everyone of the planet was gone. So with that in mind, Jiraiya had offered their current plan instead, and given the statuesque forms of his comrades that now lay on the ground deep inside the cave itself, the old man was nearly done. "Are you sure about this, Ero Sennin? What if this doesn't work? Or what if you can't get back to us once the metal men leave?" These were all questions Naruto had asked before. In fact, he had gone further several times when speaking to the Toad Sannin in private. What if the metal men didn't leave? What if Jiraiya died before he could come and awaken them again? As I have said before, Gaki, the sealing will work. I doubt that the metal men will do a visual sweep, seeing as they have those scanner things. And we have tested this against those scanners, remember, so we will be fine. And I have to be the one to do this. Unlike you, I can suppress my chakra enough that when I go to the Toads they won't be able to find me. Once they have gone, I will return or send another survivor. Given these bastards don't bleed, I think blood will be a good enough trigger to break the seals. Now, quickly before another patrol comes this way. Jiraiya gestured to the plinth of stone, covered in seals that were an integral part of the plan to disguise Naruto's chakra and put him into stasis like the others. Unlike the others who had been put in stasis whilst lying down, making their forms look like they were sleeping, Naruto had insisted he stand up for his petrification, as Jiraiya called it. As he took his place and Jiraiya began the hand signs to complete the sealing process, Naruto muttered the motto that he had picked up from Kakashi, who had gone down whilst on a rescue mission 3 months into the invasion. "Better to die on your feet, protecting the innocent, than hiding like a worm in the trash." The sensation of sleep quickly washed over him and Naruto adopted what he had decided would be his pose, stood feet shoulder width apart with the spear digging into the platform just off from his right foot. Lastly, his face was set in what he hoped was a defiant look as he stared at the cave entrance, before everything went black. Line break. It was supposed to have been an easy assignment. That was the thought that went through Nurali Badia's as she continued to stagger away from her pursuers, her left hand trying to cover the heavy wound to her stomach. A nasty memento, gained from her first encounter with one of the zombies now chasing her. Take a secondment on one of the newly colonized worlds. They paid corpsemen extra as there was a lack of skilled personnel willing to work so far out on the frontier, earn enough for an early retirement back to Earth with Samesh. A simple plan that she had felt was perfect, despite Samesh's worries about her being stationed on the edge of the terminus and the threat of pirates and Batarian slavers. Given the Geth attack and what they had done to the poor colonists, whose corpses now pursued her, Nurali would take pirates any day. Up ahead was the strange statue of a boy armed with a spear. It had been there when she arrived 3 months ago, and when she asked around, Nurali had found that the statue had actually been found in the initial Prothean ruins that had been excavated. This had garnered some interest, until they had excavated out the strange beacon artifact all the scientists had been going crazy over. Even as she stumbled into it, the blood loss played havoc with her balance. Nurali felt there should have been more interest in why the Protheans had a human statue. Especially when 50,000 years ago humans would not have been evolved enough for the clothes and weapons the statue had with it. But as she stumbled round the statue before falling to the ground, Nirali realized that wasn't going to be a question she got an answer to in this lifetime, drawing her pistol with her free hand as the sounds of the zombies came closer and closer. "I'm sorry, Samesh, so sorry." Her whisper was almost drowned out by the approaching zombies, her focus on the approaching enemies meaning that she missed the small crack of the statue's outer shell breaking slightly where her bloody handprint rested. It was like waking too early from a much-needed sleep. His senses dulled even as his rocky confines began to flex and crack around him. Naruto was aware enough to be cautious, however, sending a pulse of chakra out just in case it had been a sound nin or some other hostile that had managed to activate the release seals. He was glad he had, as he instantly sensed several things that made him wonder quite how long he had been asleep, one in particular that turned his slowly waking mind to anger. With a flex of his muscles, his former prison was shattered outwards, Kushina, what he had called his spear in honor of his mother, singing with his chakra as he moved with practiced ease to combat the foes that he had sensed in front of him. Now he could see them rather than just feel their presence. Naruto was disgusted by the appearance of the experiments in front of him, obviously another experiment unleashed by Orochimaru upon the survivors of the elemental nations. If he hadn't believed in zombies before, he definitely did now. For all the horror these things no doubt inspired due to their gruesome appearance, they were slow, ponderous and had less chakra than the average civilian. So Naruto was caught slightly off guard when his spear stabbed straight into the first experiment's skull with sickening ease. The fact that the former human hadn't even tried to dodge or block was off-putting for someone used to fighting ninja. Even as the other husks, he refused to call them zombies anymore as that was making them sound more dangerous than they are, turned from their pursuit to face this new foe he was amongst them. Sharpened by his chakra, Kushina decapitated another one whilst a chakra-reinforced fist punched straight through the third's chest, causing it to collapse like a sack of potatoes as Naruto spun away from the remaining two husks' grasping hands. There was a loud sound like a whip crack and one of the husks staggered forwards, two more retorts before its head exploded without warning. Though Naruto could tell the attack had come from the human survivor he had sensed was being chased by these things when he had awakened. But he could worry about that later, the last husk suddenly beginning to glow with lightning like some of the metal men had after the invasion. Given that such a build-up of power was almost universally a bad thing, Naruto was not going to let the thing finish whatever it was preparing, but at the same time the husk was too close to the only normal human he had been able to sense around him. Judging by her injuries, the woman wouldn't be able to avoid the technique and Naruto needed information as there was no way he was in Konoha anymore. Line break. Nirali didn't know where the boy had come from, but as he tore through the zombies that had been about to kill her she was very grateful for his arrival. In an attempt to aid him, not that she thought he needed it considering how quickly he killed the first two zombies, Nirali aimed her pistol and with 3 shots she managed to take down one of the others, leaving the one closest to her alive as her pistol clicked that it was overheated. The nimbus of energy that appeared around the last zombie worried her even if it was facing the boy. She had seen the attack earlier when several of the monstrosities got amongst the unit she had been attached to, and given the damage to her suit meant that her shield was down, there was no way she was getting out of another attack well. She shook her pistol in the hope the thing would magically cool, taking her eyes off the zombie for a moment to focus on the pistol, only for the thing's screech to cut off in a grunt that sounded remarkably human-like. Looking up she caught sight of the boy with his spear blade cutting straight through the thing's chest parallel to the ground, before with a yell of exertion he lifted the thing with his spear in a full toss over his shoulder, the resulting momentum that came with the motion causing the zombie to detach from the spear with a metallic scraping sound, its body flying well over a dozen meters before slamming into a wall and discharging its attack harmlessly. Even as the dust settled, Nirali suddenly found herself forcefully hoisted into an upright position, the boy now looking at her with an angry expression before he started speaking rapidly in a language that she didn't recognize. Thankfully her universal translator did a moment later as suddenly his sounds became words, though that didn't necessarily put her in any better shape given that she had no way of replying that wouldn't look like a threat to the obviously dangerous boy. Where are the others? What are these new monsters? Did Jiraiya send you? Struggling for breath as his hand at her injured shoulder was causing a lot of pain, Nirali did her best to sound non-threatening or aggressive as she replied, praying the boy knew English. Please, I don't know any more than you. If you would calm down I can try and help you. The blank look on his face made it clear that the boy didn't understand her, but to her surprise his grip softened and he seemed to give it some thought for a moment before nodding to himself and forming a strange sign. Suddenly there was a massive plume of smoke and before Nirali's eyes the boy multiplied. There were at least 20 of him all armed with that strange spear, most of them running off in various directions through the city's outskirts, one of them moving to the remains of the zombies whilst the closest one to her turned back to her. Now, it seems that you either cannot or will not speak in my tongue, so whether or not you are with Orochimaru or not will have to be determined otherwise. The boy's tone made it clear if he did not believe her then the consequences would not be good for her, and given what she had seen of him in combat and those copies of himself, it would also not be good for any other Alliance forces in the area still alive. So, praying that the boy would understand, Nirali started speaking whilst using her good hand to mime what the words slowly in the hope that the boy would not think she was activating some tech. Judging by the way he stiffened and raised his spear at the movement, she didn't have much confidence. Line break. Jane Shepard knew this mission could be going better. They were already a man down and Nihilus had dropped off the comms. Idiot Spectre assuming they were almighty unkillable machines as per usual. If that weren't enough, when they reached the dig site where the Prothean beacon was meant to being held, the thing had been moved and the place was swarming with Geth who were doing their best to slaughter each and every human in their path, combatant or otherwise. Luckily they had managed to save some people, Shepard's medic skills proving their use once again as she treated those she could of the survivors at the research camp, the smattering of scientists and technicians bringing hope to Caden and the Marine they had managed to save. Ashley Williams had impressed her thus far, the girl barely into her 20s and more skilled with weapons than most of the Marines aboard the Normandy. Nothing on an N7 operative of course, Jane thought a little smugly as she warp-lanced another Geth trooper that had been hiding in the upper section of one of the storage units by the docking bays, dropping a husk that had been trying to rush her with a shotgun blast at the same time. "Commander, I think you need to see this, it's Nihilus." Ashley's call as the three of them began their sweep of the area made Jane groan. That kind of request never had a happy ending to it. Line break. After finding Nihilus' body and marking the area for pickup and further investigation after the mission was over, a dead Spectre and accusations that it was another Turian Nihilus knew was the sort of thing she would get screwed with by the brass if she didn't, Jane had kept them moving towards the spaceport as fast as they could manage. Initially when the Geth had been made aware of their presence, probably during the encounter in which they had saved Williams and some survivors that the Geth had been about to sacrifice on giant metal spikes, they had come in their droves. Jane had been forced to stop just out set up a kill zone as the Normandy told her of the attackers it had detected on its scanners, planting explosive traps and enlisting a few of the surviving militia they had saved in preparation. Even with the foreknowledge and preparations they had barely been able to hold the line, 3 more dead militiamen on her hands she thought bitterly. But now they were merely encountering outposts of Geth in easily manageable numbers, so either the bastards had been forced to withdraw with their larger ship or something else was grabbing their attention. As much as the hero inside her worried about the deaths that were probably occurring due to this distraction, Jane knew there was little she could do about it without the risk of being overwhelmed herself, which both would fail the mission and probably mean the colonists' deaths regardless. The Geth plan of destroying the spaceport with their bombs was an obvious attempt to acid denial as well as disguising the true purpose behind the attack. Thankfully Caden was skilled enough with explosives to disarm the damn things whilst she and Ashley kept the slowly growing horde of Geth back. They were going to struggle to make it though, with 2 bombs left to defuse and both behind the Geth's strong points they would need to do something risky in order to break through, and despite what some said about her brash and impulsive nature, Shepard was not big on unnecessary risks. Still, desperate times meant she ordered Ashley and Caden to cover her as she prepared to try a close-quarters assault. Hopefully she would be able to break up the Geth defenses enough to leave them open to the other 2. Her imagined heroic charge didn't quite go to plan, her shields failing before she had covered even half the distance and she was forced to roll behind some Ploss steel crates, Geth fire now from 3 sides meaning she was truly pinned. The keening screech of husks made her bad situation even worse. The former humans would either overwhelm her if she stayed in cover or expose her to the deadly fire from the other defenders if she tried to kite them. She heard them getting closer and closer, readying her shotgun as she prepared to shift out and nail the first couple of them, only to get a call from Caden through the team comm system. "Commander, behind you." The call made her whirl round just in time to see a dark brown-clothed figure blur past her, a spear of all things in hand as he slammed into the husks that had been about to attack her. Shepard also noted at the same moment that the fire from the Geth was slowly dropping off and decided to risk taking a look at the situation. Looking out from her cover, Shepard was shocked to see more of the same figure engaged with the Geth troopers, moving between them with a speed that she doubted any normal human could manage. His technique with the spear was horrible. The tactical part of her mind noted as one of his swings overbalanced one of the figures, leaving it open to a blast from one of the surviving Geth. The look of pain on the boy's face had her rushing forwards towards him, warp lance splitting the offending Geth in 2 as she tried to work out what treatment she would need to give him, but then to her shock the boy disappeared in a burst of smoke, the remaining figures not even breaking their strides as they continued to decimate the remaining Geth. Reservations about this strange new type of biotics aside, Jane couldn't deny she was grateful for the assistance, even if she still didn't trust their newest ally. The Cerberus sleeper agent among her N7 squad who had killed 2 of her comrades when he had been outed as a traitor was a definite factor in her distrust, but given the situation she didn't really have much choice. As she signaled for Kaden to make a move towards the bombs as the last geth was punctured straight through its eye stalk, Jane decided that she needed to at least try and talk with their mystery figure, the only one remaining after the others disappeared in similar puffs of smoke to the one she had seen shot. Shotgun still at the ready just in case. Jane stopped about 10 meters from him as he seemed to be talking in his ear, probably a communicator. When he turned to face her, Jane was truly surprised at how young their savior actually looked now he was standing still. At best he was in his late teens, only just taller than her with an open face that had some strange whisker-type tattoos upon them, shaggy neck-length blonde hair shifting slightly in Eden Prime's wind. Despite this there was a definite air of danger about him, even ignoring the fact she had just seen him destroy a dozen geth and at least as many husks, so she hefted her shotgun defensively just in case. "I am Commander Jane Shepard of the Alliance Navy. Who are you and are you going to be a problem?" Probably not the most diplomatic way to have put it, but given the geth were after the beacon it wouldn't be a big jump to assume other unsavory organizations were after it as well. Given his skills he might well be another attempt to create a human supersoldier. The blonde seemed offended by her questions and gestured around in a very obvious, "Really?" Then he began speaking in Japanese, her universal translator taking a moment to bring up the language conversion but it was barely noticeable. "Whoa crazy lady, don't point that at me. I just saved your ungrateful ass if you didn't notice. Here I am trying to do something nice." He seemed to take a moment and his expression calmed, a smile crossing onto his face even as Jane glared at him for calling her crazy. "I am Uzumaki Naruto and I won't even bother trying to tell you where I am from as that didn't work at all with the last woman. Let's just say I am not affiliated with anyone or anything that you might be thinking of. As interested as you no doubt are in me, perhaps we should focus on getting rid of the rest of these metal men before you carry on with your terrible attempt to try and interrogate me." The haughty and slightly mischievous tone in this newly introduced Naruto's voice was obviously meant to get on her nerves and put her on the back foot, but he had a point about the geth and given his point about just leaving them to be overwhelmed she would have to trust him for now. She would get him back for his comments later and oddly, she found herself rather looking forward to it. Shepard's first thoughts as she awoke were of pain. Every part of her body ached like she had just finished 3 days of PT followed by trying to keep up with a Krogan in a drinking contest. Given that level of discomfort, it took her a few moments to remember what had led up to her being in this sorry state. With the bombs dealt with, they had moved through into the spaceport in time to encounter another wave of geth soldiers. Obviously the geth knew their attempt to flatten the spaceport and the beacon with it had failed and therefore were attempting to deal with the intruders physically. Jane had to give it to Naruto. Even if the boy didn't have the slightest idea what these metal men were or how they worked, he was very skilled at taking them apart using strange knives and his spear when he managed to get in close with them. His clones, as Naruto called them, were also very useful as distractions and decoys, moving ahead of the main group to scout for traps and ambushes. The fact that they were somehow relaying info back to him given his precognitive awareness of their enemies' movements was a further boon and something that Jane was going to ask him about after they secured the beacon, but given the general evasiveness and hostility that Naruto showed whenever she or one of the others got anywhere near him it had not really seemed like the right time. That thought brought the last few minutes of her memories back with sharp clarity. As she heard the sound of raised voices, a combination of the two caused her to awaken entirely, eyes snapping open as she scanned the room quickly before she moved. The view of overhead medical instruments, as well as the chemical smell made it clear that she was in the med bay. Now she was fully cognizant Jane could hear two voices raised in argument, both familiar to her and arguing about her from the sounds of it. "As I've told you previously, the med bay is for authorized personnel only. It's bad enough that I had to post 2 guards on the door after we initially removed you from here. But according to Dr. Chakwas you were back in here in minutes with no one outside any the wiser and as captain of this ship such a security breach cannot be ignored." The rather resigned tone of Captain Anderson reminded her of when they had first worked together whilst she was still in the N7, it was nice to hear it being directed at someone other than herself for once. "I don't care if you're the lord of the fricking universe you bastard, it's bad enough you dragged me away from wherever we were, through space and to see this council that I have never heard of. You still haven't explained to me where I was when I woke up, how I got there or what the metal men were doing, even if I believe you when you say that my friends weren't there when I was found." Shepard Leader's translation of Taiko, which is about as respectful as I can see Naruto being. "Actions mean we are honor-bound and I will not leave her side unless she tells me to." Though the first burst had been rather fiercely stated, by the end of his outburst Naruto sounded a lot more serious and calm, the connotations of what he said really hitting home with Jane as she composed herself before sitting up and speaking. "I don't know if pushing you away from the beacon after you rescued Ashley means you are whatever this honor-bound means Naruto. It is not as if you can say I saved your life or anything." Now she was sat up. Jane could see the two men stood at the end of the bed, Naruto's face lighting up a little as he turned to face her with a hint of a smile that seemed far more at home there than the frowns and blank looks he adorned during the mission. Shepherd leader, you are awake. Then as what she said sunk in, Naruto shook his head, but the smile didn't fade. And of course it counts. After all, as far as we were concerned, that energy from the beacon could have killed whoever it came into contact with, and you still saved me whilst risking yourself. If we only agreed someone saved our life by them dying for us, it would be a lot harder to pay them back. Kami only knows I have enough of them to pay back that I cannot physically do, so I'm afraid you are stuck with me, Captain. Despite his apology, Naruto didn't look even slightly sorry as a cough from Anderson brought both of their attention back to the captain as he did his best to remain professional despite obviously being pleased Jane had awoken. Despite whatever debt you feel you need to pay the commander, Alliance regulations do not allow for children to enter. That was as far as he got before Naruto cut him off, the boy looking seriously angry for the first time since Jane had met him. I am not a child, Dadbeo, just because I haven't had my growth spurt yet. I am almost 17 and I have been a ninja for almost 7 years, which means I probably have more fighting experience than most of your crew. A.N. Before people explode at this number, it includes the time that Naruto spent at the academy, including the 2 years he failed before passing on the 3rd time. Ninja? Given his clothing and fighting style, Jane doubted that he was a ninja by their definition, though it could be a designation given to him by whoever it was that trained him to be the child soldier he obviously was. And besides, if what I have read up on these specter things is true, then Jane might become one and become separate from the Alliance anyway. Suddenly Naruto's defiant tone faded a bit and he looked almost wistful as he spoke the next sentence. Also, from what Nirali-chan has told me, I am technically way older than any of you, so I don't need you trying to order me around. That comment caused Jane to raise an eyebrow in confusion. What was Naruto talking about? Anderson obviously saw her look and seemed to come to a decision, gesturing to one of the Marines who seemed to be there solely to keep an eye on Naruto if their focused gaze was anything to go by. Go and get serviceman body a soldier. I think the commander will need to hear both sides of this tale firsthand. As the Marine saluted and turned to go out of the door, Anderson turned back to Jane with a serious look on his face. You have been unconscious for 2 days, Shepherd, and in that time I have had the pleasure of doing my best to get some information out of this one, just as he has been determined to spend that time either browsing the extranet for all the information available, or doing his best to avoid me where he can. Naruto pulled a rather impolite face at this rather pointed comment, and Jane found herself smiling almost despite herself even as her headache continued to throb rather incessantly. Anderson either didn't see the face or was ignoring it as he continued. Despite my reservations about his validity, if what Mr. Uzumaki claims is true, then his survival on Eden Prime is even more important to the Council than the beacon. Not that this will mean they won't try and pin its destruction on you, of course. But we will get to that particular bombshell in a minute. I think it is best if we discuss what happened with the beacon. Shepherd, what do you remember? Despite her urge to know what the hell Anderson was talking about regarding Naruto, Shepherd knew an implied order when she heard one, so she did her best to remember the last minutes of Eden Prime and more importantly the vision that she had gotten through the beacon. Whilst Anderson looked mildly worried by what she was telling him, Naruto looked really excited. That sounds like what happened on my world. Perhaps the beacon is like Ino-chan having put a memory in it or something. Somehow Jane doubted it. The thoughts felt almost entirely alien to her. Then her mind caught up with her and she looked at Naruto in what she hoped was a serious questioning face rather than the more unprofessional confusion she was feeling. She had a strange suspicion where this conversation was going. No, I don't think so, Naruto. And why would one of your friend's memories be inside the beacon? Unless this is some kind of hallucination? Anderson shook his head at her obvious askance. A knock at the medbay door indicating the arrival of this Badia who would hopefully break whatever prank these two were trying to pull on her. Indicating to the Marine to open the door for a woman probably in her late 30s, early 40s. Anderson had gained some of his usual good humor back. That is what I thought at first as well, Commander, but given what Mr. Uzumaki can do as well as what serviceman Badia has told us, I suppose I should let you tell her, serviceman. Given the nervous look on the woman's face as she began her tale, her body language indicating she was expecting some kind of negative reaction to her words, Shepherd knew that weird visions of destruction and mayhem on a massive scale might not actually be the weirdest thing she was going to have to deal with today. Line break. The remaining time until they reached the Citadel had been interesting for the crew of the Normandy, given the large number of blonde-haired clones that had been swarming every deck of the ship investigating, questioning and generally making a nuisance of himself as he did his best to learn more about the universe he had come to exist in. Even the Naruto who had been in the med bay when she had awoken turned out to be a clone. Poofing away as Anderson had tried to have the Marines escort him from the room, proof if any was needed that Naruto still did not trust any of them. Despite this rather sudden increase in activity aboard, Jane had found herself relatively undisturbed as she did her best to carry out an investigation on the body of Nihilus in the cargo area of the Normandy. Whilst she would have preferred to carry out the investigation in situ that was beyond her control now, so she would do her best with what she had. Whilst Naruto being perched on top of the Mako watching had been slightly irritating at first, when she had been trying to reconstruct the crime scene, that irritation turned to awe as Naruto not only offered to help but spawned several more clones that would take up the positions of the Geth corpses in the nearby area, before they became corpses of course. 2 of the Geth were ruled out as relevant from the after-action reports Ashley had taken down before finding Nihilus, but that still left 4 Geth that had been killed presumably by Nihilus. As she looked around at their positions, Jane came to the same conclusion she had come to when she had originally looked over Nihilus' body in the med bay, speaking out loud to provide insight to Naruto in case he hadn't gotten the same hunch. These Geth didn't kill Nihilus, that much is clear. To her surprise, there was no question or agreement from Naruto, and when she turned to face him she found herself looking at Nihilus, fully dressed in his battle gear and reading from the datapad that held most of the evidence reports from the ground. If she didn't already know of Naruto's shape-changing abilities, Jane would have been a lot more on edge, something that obviously upset the hanged ninja as his smirk faded and he spoke up, his voice sounding more than a little weird coming from Nihilus' jaws. I thought that perhaps if we worked out Nihilus' movements we could work out what happened, Tycho, but what makes you certain that this wasn't a Geth? I can't imagine a colonist having either the ability or the motive to off a Spectre who is alert and in the middle of a war zone. And that was the rub that she would have to solve before they reached the council, with the witness reports of another Turian and Anderson's claim that this Saren was another Spectre. Jane was going to have to be impeccable in her report, otherwise she or even Naruto might well end up taking the stick for the incident. That was if this wasn't a giant council black ops operation to destabilize human interests, of course. If that was the case they were all screwed. Nihilus was shot with a Mass Effect round at nearly point-blank range from behind, which matches up with the witness account. No, it's in this section, you were on the photo evidence. Breaking from her rather pessimistic train of thought to help Naruto as he struggled to find the witness statement of the dock worker she was talking about, Jane was glad that whilst the young man, as she didn't want to call him boy anymore after his rather aggressive reaction to Anderson doing the same thing, was definitely more powerful than her in hand-to-hand combat and very dangerous given his clones, was an absolute rookie when it came to technology in any form. Even the automatic doors had supposedly spooked him at first when they had brought her back aboard the Normandy, and his lack of technical aptitude wouldn't be disappearing for a while, it seems. Given the stories he had told her in their breaks from the investigation of what some of the other ninja from his world had been able to do and had done from the little history of the elemental nations he was able to remember, Jane was glad that Naruto, for all his penchant of irritating Anderson to the point of an aneurysm, was understanding enough or trusting enough to not go postal on them for the loss of his friends. If someone like Naruto had thought they had been involved with their removal, Eden Prime would probably be little more than a lifeless hole in the ground now. Not a positive train of thought, but as she saw Naruto fist pump in celebration as he managed to single-handedly move from the witness report to the scans that had been taken of the area's surfaces, Jane could see that despite the large amounts of emotional pain that Naruto was in, his spirit wouldn't allow him to force his anger onto others if they didn't deserve it, bearing the emotional burden instead like a badge of pride on show for the whole world to see. Line break stepping out off the docking bay area with Ashley and Naruto in tow. Naruto now dressed in heavy armor that had been modified for his size, though has still kept his jacket and spear to complete the look. Shepard was surprised to find a pair of heavily armed C-Sec officers waiting for them, the Turian of the pair speaking up in what he obviously thought was an official tone. "Commander, I have orders to take that thing into custody." He nodded his head at Naruto, either not noticing or not caring about how Naruto stiffened at his term of address, hand twitching towards the spear at his back. Trying to defuse the situation before the officer carried on and made Naruto do something he would regret, as well as finding out what was going on, Shepard stepped between them. "On what grounds do you want to take him in? I know that he can't have done anything to warrant." She paused as the other C-Sec officer, a rather nervous-looking Solarian, held up a datapad with official-looking writing on it. "Directly from the council, given what has been claimed by the subject, it has been decided that further questioning needs to take place in order to validate your claims. If something about the situation hadn't smelled fishy before, it sure as hell did now. The council were to see them in a few hours anyway. Why would they want Naruto taken in by C-Sec? And more importantly, why would the council let anyone know about Naruto, since the communication from Adina had been that the whole thing was to be a secret until the Alliance and the council claimed otherwise?" She was about to state as such when help came from an unexpected source, Ambassador Adina himself coming through the doors behind them with his escort. Whether he had been able to hear the conversation through the door or one of the others had patched him into the coma, Jane didn't know, but it was definitely the first time that she had been glad to see the politician in person. "If that were indeed a council mandate for Mr. Uzumaki's arrest, it would have to have my signature attached to it as the Alliance's ambassador, or failing that, an admiral's consent, of which I am without doubt certain you have neither. So what we are going to do instead is find out whether this is an illegal attempt to detain an Alliance citizen without just cause and faking a council mandate, or whether you pair are C-Sec members at all." Jane had to admit that she underestimated Adina given how quickly he had turned the situation around on the C-Sec officers, who looked at each other for a moment before going for their weapons as two other Turians in the background drew assault rifles. Before the Turian could finish drawing his shotgun, Naruto was inside his guard, spear slamming into his shields and deflecting off to the side, but the blunt force of the blow still knocked the Turian off of his feet as his shields collapsed. The Solarian started turning in a mix of shock and anger at his comrade being downed so easily, only for Adina's guards to mow him down in a concentrated blaze of fire that Jane and Ashley were happy to contribute to. As Naruto's spear put the gasping Turian out of his misery with a thrust to the neck, the other attackers seemed to reconsider their attempted ambush and broke into the screaming and panicking crowds that made up the dock's travelers. Definitely not the way she wanted their first trip to the Citadel to start out. As she finished giving her evidence to the council about Nihilus' death, Jane could already tell it was pointless. Though she had at least managed to turn the direction of the hearing back towards the death of the Spectre instead of just lambasting humanity's perceived failures, using the analysis of his wounds to rule out both a Geth and human attacker, the council were never going to condemn one of their top agents. Saren seemed to know this as well, the slight apprehension he had shown when Jane had brought up the forensics melding away back to the arrogance and superiority complex he had demonstrated throughout the short hearing thus far. This farce proves nothing other than you let a Spectre die and still failed your mission objective, which was to protect the beacon. Given the damage to it, I doubt we will be able to ever restore its functionality. Jane had to rely on every inner scrap of her professional decorum not to unleash a tirade at Saren and the council for their attitude. She was quite proud of her restraint until a familiar voice called out from behind her on the left. Anyo, considering you kept telling us how you couldn't possibly have been at Eden Prime and that you had nothing to do with the mission, Saren-san, you seem to know an awful lot of information about what happened there. You could have heard a pin drop in the suddenly silent council chambers, Jane inwardly cheering for the boy's seemingly oblivious comment that threw the whole hearing back at Saren. Naruto's words seemed to have caught everyone off guard, proof if any was needed that the boy was more astute than he let on most of the time. Saren's delay in response for those 2 or 3 seconds all the proof Jane needed that he was lying through his teeth with his next statement. When Nihilus died, all of his files were transferred to me by the council, including all the information about the mission that led to his demise. I was not impressed by what I read. But then again, humans and those that they claim are from the time of the Protheans. That was as far as Saren got before Adina cut him off, the ambassador more livid than Jane imagined possible as he pointed an accusing finger at the council. You gave all the documents related to a murder and attempted colony genocide to the person we have proof was involved in it? Adina seemed to be about to continue when the room suddenly became several degrees colder, and when Naruto next spoke his voice was lower, almost as if he was growling, though each word could be heard with remarkable clarity. So not only do you give the person being accused of an act of war upon the Alliance all the information he needs to make any questioning useless, but you also inform him of a highest level secret that he then blurts out to an entire room of dignitaries like Genin trying to impress his playground friends? Jane hadn't thought of the implications of Saren getting hold of the mission documents the way Naruto had worded it, and it was clear that no one else in the room had either. Saren started to speak only for Naruto to speak over him in a manner that made it clear that he wasn't yet done. And not once do you stop him from being a bastard and talking about the Alliance like they are trash and deserved the Geth attack. It's almost as if you agree with what he is saying. What had been a few quiet murmurs amongst the gathered crowd suddenly became a fervor, not just from the humans there but also many of the minor council races, as they realized quite what Naruto was implying. Jane was gobsmacked at the gall Naruto had, not only accusing Saren of the Geth attack but of the council for effectively supporting it and providing him with information to defend himself of being accused of his involvement. Despite the fact she felt she should step in and stop him before he got the council to actually arrest him legally this time, Jane couldn't quite ignore the part of herself that was internally cheering as Naruto sent 3 of the most powerful people of the galaxy into a very uncomfortable position. You accuse this council. The Turian counselor looked only a couple of seconds from ordering C-Sec to do just what Jane feared, talons gripping the handrail on his podium hard enough for the creaking to be heard from where Jane was stood. Unlike the Turian, however, the Asari and Solarian counselors were a lot more astute of the mood of the room, and with only the smallest flick of her hand the Asari froze the Turian in place before he could do any more damage than he already might have with his outburst. Casting her eyes back to Naruto, Jane was surprised to see him glance at her at the same time, the young ninja seeming to question whether he should continue or not with his destruction of the galaxy's most revered political force. With a small sigh, Jane gave a small shake of her head, something she knew the more aware people in the room would catch before Naruto spoke once more, his voice returning to normal as he smiled and reached up to scratch the top of his head. Accuse? I apologize most humbly, Counselor Sama, if that is what you took my words to be. I merely was pointing out a couple of areas that I felt needed to be fully explained to avoid any confusion arising. The switch between cold-hearted soldier and cheerful bemused boy happened so fast that Jane suspected most people thought Naruto had been switched with someone else or had a bipolar disorder. And despite his grin, Naruto's eyes made it clear that the olive branch he was giving the council at this stage was one that he was more than happy to take back at any time. Obviously he was hiding more than Jane thought, given how even she had been surprised by the ease at which the boy had outmaneuvered everyone in the room, though that was probably because nobody else would ever have the balls to accuse the leaders of the main three races of supporting attempted genocide. The Solarian was the quickest to react, the frog-like alien barely glancing at his colleagues before rapidly filling the awkward silence that followed Naruto's change in tactics. Very well, Uzumaki, wasn't it? We will ignore your rather abrupt way of raising your points for now. But I ask that you make your tone a little more respectful towards this council in future and not to address us in such a manner. Jane winced as she could see in her mind's eye Naruto's grin widening at the rebuke, but to her surprise he said nothing as the Solarian continued. In regards to your questions, the process of transferring mission data between Spectres in the event of Inspector's death is all automated as soon as a Spectre's death is confirmed. This allows for any pertinent and time-sensitive data that might be useful in following up the Spectre's death to be pursued as quickly as possible. That actually made sense to Jane and seemed to mollify the crowd a bit, the Asari taking over as she put on her best smile towards Naruto. How Saren got hold of the other information will be discussed outside of this hearing, as I can assure you the council did not give out this information to anyone outside of us three. There is already an investigation going on regarding the two CSEC officers and their illegal attempted arrest of you when you arrived at the Citadel. I am sure Saren will be more than happy to oblige in telling us how he gained that information to the investigating officers when the time comes. The Asari looked up pointedly at Saren at this, making it clear that no argument of any kind would be permitted at this stage. The change in tone towards Saren and the hearing in general was incredible, Jane almost laughing at the disgruntled look on the Spectre's face as he was chastised in front of everyone. But the matter remains that there is no concrete evidence that you can provide us with that would indicate that Saren was anywhere near Eden Prime, let alone leading the Geth against the colony. The pointed avoidance of Naruto's last question about Saren's anti-human attitude was obvious to Jane as the Asari tried to bring the hearing to a close as fast as possible, though given how much damage Naruto had done by speaking for less than a minute meant that Jane wasn't really surprised they were trying to avoid giving him any more airtime. Therefore, Ambassador, with no conclusive results from the CSEC investigation either, your petition to have Spectre Saren barred from the Spectres is denied. There were more than a few angry shouts from the crowd at this, but Saren seemed to gain some of his former smugness back as he nodded thankfully to the councillors before offering a mocking bow in Adina, Shepard and Anderson's direction. I am glad to see that justice has been served. Then the image wavered and disappeared, leaving Jane with a foul taste in her mouth as the Asari adjourned the meeting, CSEC guards quickly vacating the crowds from the area before any more trouble arose. Adina was an interesting cross between frustrated and delighted as he quickly made his way over to Naruto and shook his hand rapidly. I have never seen the council change their attitude so quickly, and you definitely had them on the defensive regarding the data transfer to Saren. Despite this, Naruto did not look pleased in the slightest. His grin faded to a frown as he looked at the three rapidly conversing councillors behind the sound barrier they had erected when they finished the meeting. Seeing this and curious about his rapid change in attitude, Jane decided to ask a question that she knew might open a whole can of worms, but at least they would mostly be aimed at the council rather than at her. Naruto, what is the matter? I know we didn't get Saren, but we got somewhere right. Naruto shook his head and nodded in the direction of the Solarian counselor, eyes narrowing for a moment before nodding to himself. It's not that, Jane Taiko. I think a little investigating of our own will help us there. I am more concerned that the Solarian, right? Yeah, he lied right to our faces about that file transfer, though I have no idea what the word automated means. To his credit, Adina didn't even question Naruto's statement. Obviously the boy had very much impressed him during the hearing itself, the ambassador resisting the obvious urge to get back on the podium and start laying into the council once more. But what do we do regarding finding any evidence regarding Saren? Check in with CSEC. That Garrus seemed to have an axe to grind with Saren. Jane's question seemed to bring Adina back to reality, the ambassador quickly going over all the flaws they had in the hearing, though he could have done it in a slightly less petulant manner. 5 minutes later, Jane was heading back down the Presidium with her team of 3 in tow, several humans stopping them on the way to congratulate Naruto on taking it to those bigoted counselors, Naruto looking distinctly uncomfortable with the positive attention that he was receiving. He only cheered up when they made it to the lift and were once again on their own, both Ashley and Caden looking at him in slight awe as he leaned back against the wall with a sigh before giving a smirk and asking the question that was on Jane's own mind. So, whose heads are we going to smack together first, Jane Taiko? Persona. Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto wouldn't say he was particularly happy with how things had turned out thus far, But given he had woken up seemingly tens of thousands of years later than planned and was now on a freaking spaceship easily twice the size of the Land of Fire surrounded by aliens, he liked to think he was doing fairly well in the circumstances. He hadn't managed to find any trace of the others on the planet he had woken up on, chakra sensing over a wide range being something he had picked up from Ero Senin during the resistance against the metal men that people called robots here. It didn't work on the robots as they didn't produce chakra, but it certainly kept him ahead of Orochimaru's troops. His clones had spread far and wide in the time he had been on Eden Prime, and given the negative response he had received from them, Naruto had to conclude that he had been moved at some stage from his home, whether by the robots or some other race like these Protheans everyone had gone on about he didn't know. Summoning also hadn't worked, but if he had been asleep for as long as Nerali and the others claimed, the chances of there still being any toads left to summon were small to say the least. Many of his friends would have questioned going with the strange people who had come to collect Jane after they reached the beacon. After all, he didn't know anything about these other humans other than the fact they were fighting against the machine men and the zombies. But it wasn't like he had anywhere else to go or another method of getting off planet, and given the rather dramatic increase in the search area he had for his friends now, Naruto needed to at least get himself to somewhere he could start gathering proper information. That didn't mean he was stupid enough to trust the other humans. After all, one of the first things Iruka had taught him in the academy was that anyone not wearing a leaf headband should be considered a possible enemy at all times. Of course, Mizuki, Kabuto and Orochimaru had all proved since then that you couldn't even use the headband as a discerning form of friend-foe identification, but Naruto was doing his best not to think like that right now. So he had taken to hiding in the shadowed places of the Normandy and allowing his clones to act for him, something he knew annoyed this Captain Anderson no end. There was no killing intent from the crew, so Naruto wasn't too worried, especially when Jane had woken up and started talking to his clones like they were in fact meant to be on the ship, but you could never be too cautious. That was why he instructed his clones to make himself out to be more dangerous and experienced than he seemed at first glance. 7 years of experience certainly sounded a lot better than the year and a half that he actually had as a genin. Hopefully that would stop anyone trying to start something. Actually, now Naruto thought about it, other than Wave, he wasn't actually sure how much of his first 6 months counted as combat experience either. But that wasn't important. The captain had seemed to believe him and there wasn't really any way they could really counter his claim. Unless they actually did have one of his friends, in which case all hell was going to break loose. Any misdirection was good misdirection, as one of the surviving Konoha ninja had told him after the initial attack, though his clone was probably overdoing it with that stupid, honor-bound comment. He had tried to present the public image that Konoha used when it was trying to win in civilian contracts for its ninja, showing them as bodyguards and warriors who would protect their clients to the death rather than the no-holds-barred killers most became, but he wasn't a bloody samurai for Kami's sake. He liked Jane. She had been interesting on Eden Prime and obviously not one to stand aside and let her subordinates do all the dangerous jobs. Not to mention the fact she had pushed him out of the way when his white samurai had kicked in to manhandle Ashley out of range of the beacon. So he had intended on trying to stay with her in any case, especially once he found out about this Spectre thing she was being assessed for. It sounded exactly what he needed to carry on searching for his friends around the galaxy. But the damage had been done now and he would have to keep up the honor-bound charade or it would cast suspicion on what else Naruto had told them. Jane, Anderson and one of his clones had spent quite some time during their travel to the Citadel talking to someone called Ambassador Adina, who seemed to be one of the high-up politicians in this human alliance and one of the people they were traveling to the Citadel to go and see. Naruto didn't like him, but then again Naruto had never really liked people whose arrogance was based on their position's power as opposed to any skill they actually had. Despite the dim view he had to say, the ambassador had raised a few good points. Supposedly it had been agreed with the council that Naruto would on paper be classed as an alliance citizen, both to avoid any issues when he was boarding the Citadel and also to try and minimize any scrutiny he would receive from other parties due to his sudden appearance. It hadn't worked, given the attempted abduction that occurred right after arriving at the giant space station, but Naruto wasn't really surprised. It had hardly been a half-decent espionage attempt in his eyes. His clone, as the real him watched from a nearby alleyway, had been a bit overzealous in dealing with his attacker. Naruto still preferred to avoid killing if he could avoid it, but given the dark memories being called subject and thing had brought to his mind, it was understandable if not entirely reprehensible. The fight, if it could really be called that, had delayed them for a couple of hours as an investigation by other officers of this C-Sec division took place into why 2 of their officers had been gunned down in the middle of a crowded docking area. Naruto's clone had been interviewed by 3 separate people before finally a Turian entered and introduced himself as Executor Palin. Given how quickly Naruto had been released under the man's orders, that probably meant he was very powerful in the C-Sec organization. Palin had escorted him to his office where he had made it clear that he knew the truth about Naruto's origins, affirming Naruto's suspicions that he was in fact an important person on the Citadel and to the Council, and that if Naruto wanted to stay under the radar he would need to avoid utilizing his rather unique method of combat on the Citadel. Palin had told him any more bodies turning up with obvious stab wounds and without due authorization would ensure that he would be seeing a lot more of the inside of a cell, regardless of any demands from the Council or others. The fact that he specified the bit about authorization made Naruto grin internally even as his clone made a promise and left to head over to the embassy. Obviously there might be a chance to do some freelance work on the Citadel if things were that bad here that an executor, whatever that was offering authorized vigilante work. Upon returning to the human embassy, Naruto had found Jane and the others getting prepped to go see the Council about the attack on Eden Prime, with Adina rather snidely insisting that he stop wasting everyone's time so that they could get going. As he followed Jane and his clone as they exited the lift from the Council chambers from the obscurity of the crowds milling around the Presidium, Naruto was a little surprised by how easy it had been for his clone to mess with the esteemed Council's show trial. Naruto would be the first to admit that he was ill-suited towards many of the seedier parts that came with being a traditional ninja. But in a ninja village, when everyone talked in half-truths, insinuations and inferences, you either learned to become a decently skilled verbal combatant or you became a sucker for everyone, and Naruto was no sucker. Saren's attitude and general demeanor left so many holes for him to attack it must have been hard for the clone to keep himself at the 3 points he had used, a couple of hanged agitators in the crowd doing the rest of the work for him. God, he loved shadow clones. Once Adina and Anderson had given them their targets after the Council dismissed them, he already had half a dozen of them flitting through the station. If anything about Saren did come up elsewhere on the station, he would probably be the first one to hear it. But he could worry about that later. Naruto was now keeping track of at least 3 people who were tracking Jane and the others with various degrees of subtlety. Now, Naruto couldn't just kill or knock them out. After the attention they had received earlier, it was likely that at least one of the shadows was Council aligned and Naruto was already in their bad books. But whilst he couldn't tell who was reporting to whom and therefore who he could take out, that didn't mean that he couldn't cause them to become delayed. 5 minutes, and 2 hanged shadow clones later, 2 of the people who had been following Jane were being questioned by C-Sec over indecent assault charges and theft respectively. The Solarian and the Asari Shadowers were completely blindsided by the claims of the 2 Nerali lookalikes he had created for the task. It wouldn't stick, or at least it probably wouldn't, but that wasn't important to Naruto as he perched above the walkway leading to Korra's den. What was important was the 2 Turians he had found armed and ready for combat, waiting for the arrival of someone. With Jane on the way, Naruto had a sinking feeling he knew exactly who was the pair's target. A small smirk came over his face as he thought about it for a moment, stowing the scroll with Kushina in it and shifting position so that he was directly above one of the 2 Turians. There was nothing better than a counter-ambush to lighten a ninja's day. It all happened so fast that if she hadn't felt the impact of rounds upon her shields, Jane might have thought she had just imagined the sound of assault gunfire. They had been walking to Korra's den after checking in with Executor Palin. Checking in with the head of law enforcement on the Citadel, Naruto's idea given they were wanting to carry out an investigation into someone who had already proved that he was more than happy to hire someone else to try and take them out and also was a known politically savvy adversary. That now seemed to be a very good idea seeing as they were under attack. She didn't know how Naruto had done it, but after explaining what their plan was, Palin and Naruto had merely looked at each other for a moment before Palin allowed them to investigate further into Saren, as long as they had a C-Sec member with them whenever they performed any investigatory work. This would allow for the evidence to be used in legal proceedings without fear of it being thrown out for being contaminated. Given they had been going to find Garrus anyway, Jane was more than happy to agree, since the writ that Palin gave them would allow them to act as conscripts to C-Sec under Garrus for the duration of the investigation. But it wouldn't cover them being attacked before they found Garrus. Drawing her shotgun against the new threat, Jane was surprised when suddenly the Turian who had shot at her was downed by a familiar figure who descended left foot first onto the Turian's back, sending the Turian to the floor with shields shattering under the force even as Naruto spun in the air. His foot slammed into the other Turian's jaw even as he turned with weapon ready, shotgun going off over Naruto's left shoulder as the young ninja then went to work with his fists, 2 blows slamming into the Turian's shields in less than a second, before they failed spectacularly. The Turian tried to back up even as Shepard and the others moved up to hem him in, but Naruto didn't give him any space and bodily threw the Turian into the wall next to him so hard he actually bounced off and rolled over twice before coming to a groaning stop. Indicating for Kaden to check the first Turian, Shepard kicked the second one's shotgun away from him before turning to the Naruto that had counter-ambushed them. Given his slightly heavier breathing, Shepard had a suspicion and decided to test it a moment later. There was the start of a cry from the Naruto next to her as she cuffed him round the head, causing him to explode into smoke a moment later, drawing a confused look from the Naruto in front of her. "You are the real one, I assume?" It was more a statement than a question, and given Naruto's slight widening of the eyebrows, Jane knew she was spot on. But she didn't elaborate any further than that. After all, if she did tell him that she had based her guess on the fact that his clones didn't alter their breathing unless they were absolutely exhausted, then he would just make sure to cover that for next time. Good work on these two, though a little warning would be nice next time. The mixed compliment and rebuke made Naruto smile a little sheepishly even as Ashley and Kaden finished checking them for weapons or other equipment, the 2 pistols, supply of metagel and small stock of grenades, showing that the pair had properly been prepared for battle rather than this being a random mugging attempt. Can your clones take these 2 to C-Sec whilst we move on? Even if they did try and kill us, it is a bit heartless to leave them unconscious and bound in an area like this. It also might get them in Palin's good books and even the name of the person that hired them to try and kill her, but primarily because she liked to think of herself as having some morals. Naruto nodded, and a moment later a trio of clones appeared before shifting themselves into nondescript humans, 2 of them staying stood over the bodies whilst the third flitted off back the way they had come, undoubtedly to get a hold of C-Sec and bring them here rather than try and take 2 unconscious Turians through the wards. Jane also instructed the clones to take the Turians' weapons, primarily to deter those she could already see skulking nearby, but also to stop the Turians from causing any trouble if they woke up. If C-Sec wanted to take the weapons, that was fine, but Shepard had always been a bit of an opportunist, and if the opportunity to obtain a couple of extra weapons was there, she would happily take it. Now all she needed to do was stop the real Naruto from bailing at the first opportunity and leaving her stuck with a clone again. Persona Naruto. They had checked in with Harkin, the drunken layabout, quickly fraying both Jane's and his own temper with his attitude, but the information about where they could find Garrus was very useful. Almost too useful, in fact, Naruto thought as he checked the last of the bodies in the clinic that the 5 of them had just cleared. Harkin was probably much better at intel gathering than everyone realized if he was able to keep such good tabs on any one person amongst the thousands in C-Sec. Something for him to investigate further at another time. The information drive Michelle had provided them meant that they had an actual tangible lead, though given their potential source was unknowingly trying to give her damning information to their enemy without realizing it, that might mean nothing. Garrus and Shepard were all for storming back to Korra's den and dealing with Fist until they found out where this mysterious Quarian was, but the memories of 2 of his clones that he had received in the last few minutes made Naruto a little more cautious about the potential backlash. Clone 1 memory. I have station-wide reports of a vigilante who has taken out over a dozen muggers, drug dealers and other unsavory characters in a matter of 3 hours, despite the net distance between the different events being far than would be possible by a human not using the taxi-car system and knowing where each event was going to take place in advance. It is almost as if there were in fact multiple copies of the same person scattered throughout the Citadel. Executor Palin gave Naruto a nonplussed look at this point, something Naruto could understand now that he had looked the Citadel up a lot more on the extranet. Each of the 5 arms that made up the Citadel's main body had 40,000-odd C-Sec officers serving as a mixture of the police and other emergency response units, and right at the top of that pile was the Turian sat in front of him. The only reason the Executor had time to deal with him in person was that each of the armed districts ran themselves pretty much independently, leaving the Executor primarily to control the funding of the overall organization, the joint operations between the different groups, and of course the C-Sec Royal Guard, who protected the Presidium and the council chambers. Given the rather ridiculous responsibilities of the man's tasks, Naruto could see how Palin was a little upset with him rocking the boat with his extracurricular work, but he felt he had to defend his actions a little at this stage. What else was I meant to do, Executor-san? Let those people get away with what they were doing. Someone could have gotten killed if I had ignored it. Palin seemed to be a little less upset at his protest, which was a good thing, but then he seemed to remember something else that had no doubt been mentioned in the reports. And the fact that all of the individuals in question had been stripped of their armor, weapons and money before being tied to various objects with "Present for C-Sec" inscribed in some kind of pen into their foreheads. By the Primarch Uzumaki, one of them was a Krogan. Oh, so the boss's other clones had reverted a little to their pranking ways, understandable given his frustration at things. And the weapons etc. were a good start on making some money of his own so that he wouldn't have to keep scrounging off Shepard all the time, though telling Palin that probably wouldn't earn him any plus points. So Naruto fell back on an old trick of his he had used with the Sandaime Hokage back when he had been a child. No idea what that is about. I am sure I had nothing to do with that occurring, Executor-san. True in the strictest sense. This particular clone had nothing to do with it. Palin seemed to realize the game he was playing and sighed in frustration before flicking something across the table to him, a silver badge that Naruto had only heard about when he had been looking up the organization on the internet. Well, if I can't stop you from doing these things on my station, I can at least make sure you do it properly. You are now a contracted C-Sec agent and will be able to stop crimes in progress, though no more taking people's gear unless there is a valid reason for such actions, understood? Looking down at the little badge with a giant grin on his face, Naruto had nodded his head. He was going to have a lot of fun with this. Clone 1 memory and yeah. Best Naruto let the executor know of what they were planning, even with Garrus and now him there to make the thing slightly less illegal. The fact they had already killed half a dozen people and not even started did not bode well for a bloodless incident to come. And if that was going to be the case, then there was someone else they probably wanted along for the ride. Clone 2 memory. The clone had been in the Presidium C-Sec building when he had heard mention of trouble at Korra's den being discussed by a C-Sec officer, as he and 3 other officers escorted a particularly well-scarred Krogan from the holding cells. And stay away from Korra's den, Rex. You are already in trouble for the incident upon your arrival, anymore. And the C-Sec officer stopped as the Krogan merely turned and cast him a glowering look, the officers reaching for their weapons as he growled. You'll do what, dog? I could take you all down before you hand a chance to use those weapons, and you know it. Let Fist know that I am coming for him, and just pray you aren't the one he calls for help from when I do. The Krogan was certainly interesting, and dangerous enough to cow 4 officers of the law into backing down inside their own bloody HQ. If he was going to be aiming for Korra's den, then it was best if the boss knew right away. Clone 2 memory and a quick search on the extranet by one of his other clones had highlighted the Krogan warlord's infamous and bloody career that stretched back almost a millennia. When it came to battle experience and body count, Naruto doubted anyone could claim to have more than Rex did. And now they had a common enemy, though Naruto hoped that Rex would see it that way as he called out to Shepard to tell her of his plans. If Rex decided they instead were competition, then it wouldn't be Fist they had to worry about. *timeskip**. Luckily Rex had decided that extra help wouldn't be an issue, especially when Jane had made it clear that she wasn't trying to get in on the bounty money and merely wanted information from the man. Naruto had offered to keep searching the wards whilst they stormed Korra's den. Given his still rather pathetic accuracy with the guns everyone seemed so fond of, and Palin's request that he not use his spear unless absolutely necessary, he would most likely be as much a spectator as an asset. He had some jutsu he could use, of course, but the more of those he could keep under wraps the better. Jane had given him a long look that reminded him of Sakura-chan when she wasn't entirely sure if she trusted what he had said, a look that still struck him with phantom terror that he had done or said something that would set off the cherry blossom's rather short emotional fuse. Guessing what it is Jane wanted, he promised he would keep in touch via the comms and that he would be the one coming back. That seemed to confuse both Garrus and Rex, but Naruto was fine with that. The 2 aliens only just on first name terms with him would have to somehow stick around for quite some time before he gave them anything else. With Shepard's taciturn approval, Naruto had jogged off whilst the others made their move towards Korra's den, the sounds of fighting and gunfire letting Naruto know quite how prepared Fist had been for trouble. Another strike against the Council and C-Sec's internal security, given Palin had only given approval for the raid 20 minutes ago and the paperwork would probably not be cleared for the next couple of hours, but they could worry about that once they found this Quarian and had her safe from any other reprisals Saren might have in store. Given there were thousands of Quarians in the ring wards alone, the idea that he would be able to find the one they needed was laughable given the lack of distinguishing features the body-suited aliens had to offer, but given that if Fist hadn't already met and killed her then she would not be in Korra's den, then having people spread out through the station would be beneficial if Fist did know anything useful about her. Naruto. Jane's voice over the comms was a surprising relief to Shepard after the minutes of silence after the fighting. He had originally been worried that they had been overwhelmed by Fist's security. Yes, Shepard Tycho. Whilst waiting for her to continue speaking, Naruto created another clone, which would act as a relay to the other clones on the station when it dispelled. Fist is talking. Seems he still has this Quarian under the impression that he works for the Shadow Broker. She has asked to meet with the Shadow Broker in person, which would never happen, but Fist has claimed that he has arranged it at a secluded location in the wards. I am sending you the location now. The meet is in 10 minutes, which is cutting it close from the den. What is your ETA? Looking at his Omni tool, a present from Jane that worked a lot better than the original piece of outdated crap Adina had presented him with, Naruto realized that he was nearly at the location she had highlighted. I can be there and set up in 2 minutes, Shepard Tycho. What are your orders if the Quarian arrives before you do? There was a murmured discussion on the other end of the line before Jane spoke once more. If possible, warn the Quarian and then keep her hidden and safe until we arrive. If that isn't possible and as Fist claims there are assassins from Saren waiting for her, deal with them however is necessary but keep that Quarian alive. Easy enough orders then, now to go check out the ambush site. Line break. Persona Tali turning into the alley that Fist had told her the Shadow Broker's agents would be waiting to vet her and then lead her to the Shadow Broker himself. Tali seriously regretted ever taking that data off the Geth's memory banks. Since then she had been hounded halfway across the galaxy and even now was constantly looking over her shoulder in case one of Saren's men had finally managed to track her down. There were 3 people waiting for her in the alley, A Turian stood in an obviously impatient manner and a pair of Solarians leaning against a power unit a little further down. The Turian noticed her arrival and gestured with his arm. "Did you bring it?" That question brought Tali up short for a moment. This wasn't how Fist had said things were going to go. "What about the Shadow Broker? And where is Fist?" There was a sinking feeling in her stomach as the Turian sighed and shrugged in a very uncaring manner. "They will be here. Now where is evidence?" So either Fist lied to her or the Shadow Broker decided not to bother with an exchange. Either way, Tali needed to leave right now. "No way. The deal is off." The fact that this didn't seem to surprise or upset the Turian was another warning bell joining the half a dozen others that were going off in her head as all three of them suddenly drew pistols in an obviously menacing manner. Tali went to palm the grenade that had been in her belt for this exact reason, calculating mentally the distance between where she was stood now and the nearest cover, when suddenly her world vision spun. A moment later she found herself collapsed on one of the walkways overlooking the alley even as the three assassins opened fire at where she had been standing. As she moved to right herself from the strange half-lying position she found herself in, Tali froze as a hand covered the lower half of her face visor, the feeling of someone else pulling her to them in a firm but not overly threatening manner, a new and rather unique sensation. "Shush, don't move or they will hear you, Quarian-chan." The voice was obviously male and her internal communications display showed he was talking a human language called Japanese, and despite the plethora of questions about how she had gotten to where she was and who he was, Tali did as he asked. The assassins were still searching the nearby hiding places for her when suddenly the male holding her in place spoke once more, though this time it obviously wasn't to her. "I have the Quarian. There are 3 of them, Shepherd Tycho. Want me to take them out?" Tali didn't hear the reply but by the Krogan roar that reverberated around the alleyway. After all, there was no other species in the galaxy that could be quite that terrifying with a simple noise. Followed by the sharp staccato of gunfire made it clear that whoever this person was working with had decided to sort things out for themselves. The grip on her visor and waist suddenly released and Tali took the opportunity to rapidly move away from her erstwhile savior, captor, turning to look at who it was she owed her rescue to. The first impression she got looking at the blonde-haired human in front of her was that he was quite young even by the standard of the few humans she had interacted with since starting her pilgrimage. But even in a crouched position he had a confidence that made her wary even as his eyes shifted between her and the fight below. She went to grab her pistol, more to reassure herself that she had some defense left as opposed to trying to threaten him, but her hand met an empty holster. Looking for this Quarian-chan. Her frantic panicking abated slightly as she saw the human holding her pistol in his left hand, not even slightly contrite as he held it out to her with a cheeky grin on his face. "Apologies, but I didn't want you to do anything stupid when I grabbed you, Quarian-chan. Now, judging by the fact that those guys just tried to kill you, I think I would be safe in saying you need a hand, correct?" As she took back her pistol with slightly shaking hands, her delayed response to the life-death situation she had been in, Tali knew without asking that the man was not asking and more telling her that he and whoever this shepherd was had business with her whether she liked it or not. But given that her last shot of evading Saren by going to Fist had failed terribly, it wasn't like Tali had any other options, not that she could probably get away from this guy if she wanted to, given how easily he had held her in place and spirited her away from the ambush. Still, even if she knew that this man might well kill her for it, Tali would rather die quickly as opposed to walking into yet another trap naively. "You're not with Saren, are you, human? Not that I am ungrateful for you saving me or anything, and even if you were I am sure that I wouldn't be able to stop you if you did want to hurt me." "Okila," she was babbling again, "this is embarrassing." Luckily the human didn't seem to mind as he grinned at her before shaking his head. "No, in fact he is part of the reason why Shepherd Tycho is here. We are in fact trying to gather evidence against him." Evidence he obviously already knew she had, otherwise they probably wouldn't be having this conversation. The human paused for a second before looking down and speaking again. "Looks like they are done, Quarian-chan, so I think we had best get back down there. But not a word of where we went to anyone, okay?" Tali nodded a little distractedly, a small part of her mind noting that it would be hard for her to tell anyone how they had got up there given she had no idea. For the most part she was more assessing the 30-foot drop and quite how the human intended for them to get down. Line break, persona Jane Shepherd, and one step closer to the return of the Reapers. The woman's voice reverberated around the council chambers after the damning rendition of Saren's boastful comment. Even now, after having heard it half a dozen times, Shepherd was absolutely giddy at sticking it to the bastard. They had only met that once, but he had managed to piss her off more than anyone that wasn't a Batarian. Of course, the council had to verify the recording that Tali had submitted to Executor Palin, an idea from Anderson to further remove the idea this was a human crusade against the Spectre. But with Palin's word and with no signs of tampering, the council had no recourse other than to admit they were wrong this time. Probably why the council rooms had been cleared of everyone but ambassadors and other high-ranking council race members. "You wanted proof, there it is." Adina for once was selective with his wording, but his smugness was easy to hear even as the mutterings of the ambassadors started up with Ernest. Obviously this kind of embarrassment to the council and their little force of operatives didn't happen very often. This proof is irrefutable, Ambassador. Saren will be stripped of his Spectre status and all efforts will be made to bring him to justice. When the Turian finished speaking, the Asaris spoke with a slightly disbelieving tone tinging her melodic voice. I recognize that other voice, the one speaking with Saren in the recording. As much as I don't want to believe it, that is the voice of Matriarch Benezia. Shepard was not as up-to-date with Asari culture as he would perhaps have liked, but anyone with an obviously powerful title like Matriarch was not someone he wanted on Saren's side. I am unfamiliar with the term Matriarch and this Benezia counselor, would you please enlighten us? The Asari nodded, tone firmer as she spoke of the culture of her people. Matriarchs are powerful Asari who have entered the final stages of their lives. They are revered for their wisdom and collected experiences, often they serve as guides or teachers to my people. Due to their hallowed status, matriarchs are venerated by many young Asari who will follow their path almost without question. Matriarch Benezia is one of the most powerful biotics of her generation and her teachings have given her many followers. If for whatever reason she has allied herself with Saren, then she will give him a formidable array of resources to wield in addition to his established Spectre network. Shepard felt like turning and smashing her head against a wall, an ex-Spectre with an army of Geth and allied with a very powerful Asari with a sizable force of her own and centuries of experience. This day just kept getting better and better. The Solarian spoke up in the ensuing silence, obviously eager to shift the focus away from what was quickly becoming a rather major political embarrassment for him and his colleagues. I am more interested in Saren's mention of the Reapers in the recording. Obviously if he was on Eden Prime for the beacon as has now been proven, he is trying to gather information on them. Captain Anderson, Commander Shepard, what do you know about them? Anderson took a step forward and Shepard let his superior speak. He could tag on any other information the captain didn't mention at the end. Only what Tali here managed to extract from the Geth data core along with the recording about Saren. The mention and gesture to the nervous Quarian girl had the Solarian narrow his eyes in distaste whilst the Turian full-on frowned, the two's expressions making Tali look like she was about to bolt. As Anderson carried on speaking, Shepard was both slightly amused and surprised when Naruto moved from slightly behind her and to the left, stepping across purposefully to stand between Tali and the council, crossing his arms and giving a blank stare as the Turian focused on him whilst the Solarian looked away a little uncomfortably. The Reapers are an ancient race of machine that wiped out the Protheans before suddenly, they vanished from the known galaxy. Seeing her chance to interject with her own view as Anderson finished speaking, Shepard spoke up, her eyes never leaving the Turian counselor's own after the counselor looked away from Naruto. The Geth seem to revere the Reapers almost as gods, and whether using the Geth for his own ends or because he actually believes he can do so, Saren is becoming their prophet for the Reapers' return. Whatever this conduit is that Saren mentions, it is obviously key to bringing them back. That is why he attacked Eden Prime, he is searching for it and the beacon was a clue. The counselors looked unconvinced even as Shepard spoke, but that was unsurprising as it was one hell of a tough sell, but it was certainly how it looked based on what she had seen thus far. Do we even know what the conduit is that they are searching for? The Solarian was at least being objective if skeptical about the whole thing, which was something Shepard could certainly respect and appreciate given the almost unthinking denial from his compatriots. Seeing Anderson glance at her, it was obvious Jane was to field the question. No, we don't, but does that really matter, counselors? Saren believes it exists and has shown that he will happily destroy entire colonies in his attempts to find it. The Turian almost didn't speak at that comment, seeming to second-guess himself for a moment before uttering a response in an incensed tone that truly showed the man was now under pressure. Listen to yourself, Commander. You think that Saren wants to bring back an armada of machines that wiped out all advanced life in the galaxy 50,000 years ago? It is impossible nonsense. It has to be. If the Reapers do exist, where did they go? Why would they leave after completely winning what must have been a costly conflict for them? And there has been no trace of their existence other than a few garbled texts obviously written by madmen? If they were real, we would have had to have found something. Obviously the Turian was more focused on quelling the panic that would arise from the existence of a galaxy-cleansing machine attack, rather than trying to prevent the possibility of it happening. Shepard sighed, she could already see where this was going, but had to try and get it into their heads quite how big a deal this actually was. Regardless of whether or not the Reapers are still around, the fact that Saren is searching the galaxy for them is proof enough we need to take action. Better to have taken action needlessly than have been caught unawares. The Asari shook her head, which didn't really surprise Shepard all that much. What you are proposing is different to the issue of dealing with Saren. I will admit we were wrong about Saren and you proved that. For some reason he is after this conduit device, but we do not really know why. The Reapers are obviously just a myth, Commander, one that Saren is using both to utilize the Geth as well as to hide his true purpose, whatever that may be. The Solarian seemed a bit unsure of the Asari's words but kept his mouth shut as the Turian counselor weighed in. Not that it matters anymore, Saren has been stripped of his title, resources and manpower. Whatever he hoped to achieve will be difficult whilst he has no means to achieve them. Shepard actually couldn't believe the Turian's comment given what they had just discussed, barely restraining herself from losing all control of her temper and letting rip with what she thought of the honored counselor's opinions. I'm sorry, Counselor Sama, but if that is your opinion, I think we have just been listening to two very different conversations. All rage dissipated from Jane's shoulders as her new best friend spoke up for the first time since the hearing had begun, Jane enjoying the slight look of concern that passed over the Asari counselor's face before she too turned to look at the young ninja. Though Naruto's pose was the same as when he had moved in front of Tali before, there was now a rigidness of his body that spoke of anger. He was doing a magnificent job of keeping from his voice as he gestured around the room almost mockingly. I can't speak for all of these good people, of course, it might be my translator that acted up. So to clarify, Counselor Sama, Saren has an army of Geth that, whilst of an unknown size, is certainly large enough to prevent the Quarians from trying to retake their home. This is with them having the largest single fleet in the galaxy, of course. In addition, he has a ship that is larger than the Destiny Ascension along with a wizened Asari and her own band of followers, again of unknown size and skill. Whoever taught Naruto to ovate needed to give her lessons, Jane decided as he paused for just a moment to let the true magnitude of what this now ex-Spectre had to command, before Naruto gave his final blow of his impromptu speech. Is that what you meant when he had no resources or manpower, that humanity needed to be worried about, Counselor Sama? Or did I get a mistranslation of all of that? There was silence for several moments as everyone in the chamber tried to work out whether Naruto had in fact pointed straight at the elephant in the room they had all been ignoring, or merely pointed at the footsteps and let everyone else make their own conclusions. The council seemed to have learnt their lesson from last time about reacting instantly to Naruto's unsubtle jibes hidden in his attempt to clear up a possible mistranslation. God, she was going to have to use that one at some point in the future. Instead, the three of them spoke quietly for a moment before the Solarian spoke up a little hesitantly. You definitely do not hide your feelings or mince your words, young man, even if you do better at veiling your accusations now, something I think my fellow counselors are not used to. I agree with you, this is a threat we cannot simply ignore, but you must understand, we as the council cannot bring the galaxy into turmoil rashly. Even with the threat Saren poses to humanity's colonies. The grin that appeared on Naruto's face showed the Solarian's mistake, the words lighting a fire in Adina as he whirled back to face the council from where he had been watching Naruto approvingly, voice loud and angry. Enough, I have had it with the anti-human resentment shown here. You have in effect given this lapdog of yours enough power and resources to damage humanity's interests for decades if not centuries to come, and now you say you will do nothing? You might as well be giving Saren's attacks against us your personal blessing. Shepard had to admit Adina had a surprising gift for altering the tone and meaning of a conversation to his advantage, even if he was just rehashing Naruto's material from the last council meeting. Naruto didn't seem to mind though, the ninja allowing the focus to shift from him to the ambassador, his work seemingly done for the moment and now content to become lost in the crowd once more. Even with very few humans in the room this time, there was a lot of angry murmuring now, primarily from the races like the Volus and the Elcor, who had always been in the shadow of the council and were now obviously wondering if there was a reason for that. I would remind you of who you were speaking to before you accuse us so blatantly of corruption and wrongdoing, Ambassador Adina. We have not and will not give Saren any such support that you have alluded to, but for us to strike out into the terminus blindly and without direction would be worse for everyone, including humanity. What I was going to say before your brazen attempt at mob politics hit the stage was that there is another option, one that does not involve fleets or armies directly. The Asari obviously realized that the council were very quickly being backed into a corner, from which they would only have had were two very unpleasant and far-reaching ways of dealing with the problem. So she was trying to take the third wildcard option that Jane had almost entirely forgotten about given the events since Eden Prime, the Turian counselor realizing at the same time what the Asari was implying and obviously not happy with it in the slightest. No, humanity is not ready for the responsibility. The Turian, though obviously incensed, trailed off quickly as the Asari turned a baleful glare in his direction even as grumbling erupted in the watching crowds once more. She assessed the tension in the room before whispering across to the Turian, Jane only catching it as she had her suit microphone trained on her. This situation is already a political nightmare as it is. If we are seen to do nothing now, the Alliance could well break from the Council, if not worse. This way we do not risk galactic war and give humanity what we were going to give them anyway. Judging by the cheeky grin and wink from Naruto after she heard that, Jane had no doubt he had heard the same as she had. And somehow Jane got the idea that this was what his intervention had been in aid of in the first place, to push the council into a corner where they would promote her to a specter rather than just try and brush the whole thing under a rug. With that, the Asari looked over to the Solarian counselor, who nodded quickly before turning back to face the 4 humans and the others. The Turian looked like he was going to refuse for a moment, but then all 3 typed something into the console in front of them, the Asari counselor speaking up a moment later. "Commander Shepard, step forward." A glance to Shepard's right and a quick nod from Anderson told Shepard this was about to be the big moment she had been told to expect upon landing on the Citadel from Eden Prime. Stepping up so that she was stood next to Adina, Jane looked around to see the viewing platforms quiet and in obvious anticipation of what was to come. "It is the decision of the Council, having reviewed your actions both on Eden Prime and before that, to grant you all of the powers and privileges of the Special Tactics and Reconnaissance branch of the Council." As the Council carried on an obviously scripted and well-practiced intermix of short speeches, Jane couldn't help but feel a little cheated. Even with everything she had done, all the achievements and sacrifices she had gone through, her promotion was now based on political intrigue and what was essentially blackmail. Even as she put on a fake smile and said her acceptance of the offer, Jane berated that rather depreciating thought, her thoughts turning more positive as she turned to face the crowd and her eyes locked with Naruto's. The young ninja gave her 2 thumbs up before joining in the clapping, and somehow, that made the whole ordeal somewhat more bearable. Being a C-Sec contracted PI was evidently good business, Jane thought, as she and Naruto sat down for dinner to celebrate her Spectre promotion. The ninja having asked that they go to a weapons shop first, so that Naruto had some items other than the spare marine armor that had been rather quickly adapted to his size, before then asking if she then wanted to go for ramen afterwards. The request for assistance with procuring Naruto some new equipment had surprised her slightly, the young ninja usually determined to do everything by himself if he could at all manage it. And, if he had been a bit older, Jane would have assumed he was yet another idiot trying to get into her pants by flaunting some money around. But that was just her rather pessimistic view on men shining through probably, and Naruto didn't seem the type that was used to having money at all, let alone enough of it to go on a spending spree like this. They had left the others at the Normandy for now, even though Jane had agreed to have Tali, Garrus and Rex join their crew. That didn't mean she trusted them enough to let her guard down yet. They were each a specialist in their own fields, and given the magnitude of the task before her, Jane wasn't going to turn down free allies, especially ones she actually knew without a doubt were against Saren. But that didn't mean they weren't working for someone else that might decide to cause her trouble, so for now she would keep them at arm's length, Naruto clones watching their every move. As for the 2 Alliance members of her strike force, Ashley needed some rest after all the running around, and Caden's implants had started acting up, meaning it was only the 2 of them. So after a cab journey that took them away from the core of the Citadel and instead into one of its arms, Naruto was now armed with a Firestorm Mk4 shotgun, a pair of striker pistols, and dressed in Predator armor that probably matched or exceeded her own armor at the moment in terms of defensive capability. Though she had been honest with her appraisal of the different weapon and armor types and their key points, Jane had initially balked at the final price tag when he had followed her suggestions almost to the letter. But Naruto had just given her another of his slightly infuriating grins before paying with a credit chip she certainly hadn't seen anyone give him and promising to explain later. After another mouthful of noodles, Jane decided that she might as well broach the topic now before it bugged her further. "Naruto, where did you get the money to buy that equipment? You've only been on the Citadel a day." Naruto chuckled and tapped something into his Omni tool, not quite as agile as a normal person yet, but given his lack of familiarization it was incredible quite how quickly he was adapting. "Jane-chan, are you accusing me of immoral activities?" Even with the indignation in his voice, Naruto's grin remained, and as she checked the mail that he had forwarded to her she could understand why. "The Council gave you how much, just because you are a new species that needs help integrating into society, and yet they expect me to fund my hunt for Saren on my own money?" Naruto chuckled again and shook his head, even as her inbox chimed again with a notification of her accounts, showing a deposit of 50,000 credits had been made less than a minute ago from an unknown account. Despite the generosity of the gesture, Jane couldn't help but get angry at the young man in front of him. She didn't need pity from him even if that isn't how he meant it. Naruto seemed to realize her change in mood before she had a chance to speak, the young man quick to hold up his hands defensively as her own tightened into fists. "Whatever you were thinking, Jane-chan, it's not like that." Despite her inner urge to make her opinion of what it seemed like very clear, Jane decided to give Naruto a chance to explain himself first. After all, he had already surprised her a couple of times, this might yet be another one of them. From what the Council said along with Adina-san's information, Spectres can act as everything from business owners to assassins, as long as they keep broadly within the rules of the Citadel races and don't do anything overtly against the law. So in effect, you are now in the same job role that I used to be in, Jane-chan, only with a lot more freedom from your boss aka the Council to pick and choose any other jobs you wish to take. Way to water down her promotion even further. Naruto now made her sound like a gun for hire more than anything else. "So with that in mind, the credits are a down payment on the job we already agreed on, Back on the Normandy before we had to deal with these idiots. It took a moment, Jane's memories of the last few days since the rather whirlwind arrival of the young ninja, but then it clicked and she actually felt slightly guilty for her earlier anger. Naruto, I said I would help you look for your people because it is the right thing to do, not because of money. This is your money to start a life here, you could use it to get information. Jane paused as Naruto held up a hand and pointed at the email that she still had open on her arm. You didn't read the small print, Jane-chan. That money is more the council's attempt to shut me up and get me off the citadel. Obviously they didn't like me helping you during their bullshit. Jane giggled slightly as the memories of the Turian counselor came to the forefront of her mind, Naruto lowering his hand and relaxing a little as he finished explaining. So me giving you the money is, in order of increasing importance, a massive fuck you to the three of them for what they tried to pull on us twice. My contribution to the let's stop some maniac from trying to wipe out the galaxy fund. And Naruto paused, and for the first time he looked actually uneasy with what he was going to say next. What is it, Naruto? The ninja seemed to wrestle with something for a moment before he smiled apologetically at her. An apology for effectively blackmailing the council into promoting you into being a specter. Whilst it works out very well for me as I can travel the galaxy looking for my people with you, that doesn't mean that it was the right way for it to happen. Jane couldn't help but smile at the obvious awkwardness Naruto was exhibiting. It wasn't exactly as if the council had any other choice given the circumstances anyway. Naruto, don't worry about it. At his slightly disbelieving look she slugged him in the arm, which to her counted as camaraderie. Honestly, Naruto, it's fine. I am somewhat used to getting promotions due to politics rather than merit. Unfortunately, I was only a squatty when Elysium was hit, and then suddenly the promotions came storming in. Even the one to the Normandy could be considered a promotion, not that I saw it that way. It was only as Naruto tilted his head in obvious confusion that Jane realized that despite his rapid acclimatization he was still a complete novice to galactic history and her recent role in it. That was probably one of the reasons she found herself so comfortable with the young ninja, even if they didn't mean to. Almost everyone she spoke to or worked with in the Alliance talked to her with the kind of awe that bordered on reverence. She tried not to let it piss her off, but it was irritating to be held up on such a pedestal and then judged for everything she did based against that inhuman image. A memory of a snarling Batarian stood over her father's corpse came to the fore of her mind, and she shook her head to remove it even as she came to a decision. Whilst she couldn't tell Naruto about all of her past, hell, even Anderson didn't know about her darkest moments, it would be better he hear what happened on Elysium from her rather than one of her admirers. Steeling her nerves, Jane began to speak. I suppose I should explain a little more about myself for you to understand that. It was my first tour of duty after graduating the Marine Academy. Naruto turned out to be a pretty good listener despite his usually sarcastic and gobby attitude, nodding at the right moments and keeping himself to short questions about things. Jane couldn't say it was nice to talk about it all once more. The number of reports and evaluations she had been forced to complete in the years after her rather desperate defense meant it had become almost a numbing experience. But the fact that Naruto had no preconceived notions about her, and didn't seem at all put off by the rather brutal melee combat she had resorted to when she had finally run out of ammo, was strangely calming. Though his lack of distaste for the messiness of close-quarter fighting made sense considering he came from a society that didn't know what guns were until their genocide began, so it was probably a norm for him. At the end of it Naruto shrugged, which wasn't the reaction Jane expected either way. As much as you probably don't want to hear this, Jane-chan, that is how it always happens. If it weren't for that kind of favoritism, in fact I probably wouldn't even be here. Now that was the sort of statement which promised an interesting story, and after baring her heart, as much as she could really imagine herself managing, Jane felt that she was owed some personal information of her erstwhile and still mysterious companion. Line break telling the tale of his graduation, with a large amount of artistic license of course to avoid mentioning the Kyuubi. Naruto knew that he had managed to distract Jane from her own insecurities about her promotion for the time being. Whilst he and the Kyuubi had come to something of an agreement after the invasion, the Fox far less keen to break out after they had seen what happened to Kurabi and the Hachibi, that didn't mean he wanted anyone to know about his major trump card until push came to need to annihilate a small army in a few minutes. So he made Mizuki out to be a simple infiltrator who had just used Naruto as the fall guy to steal village secrets for him, the Hokage promoting him despite his rather sketchy academy performance due to his parents as he had known them before they died. It wasn't entirely untrue and had been something that had plagued Naruto after Konoha had fallen, the boy struggling in the first couple of months due to his rather deficient academy lessons on things like survival skills. If it hadn't been for people like Sakura to teach him, Naruto was sure even the Kyuubi wouldn't have been able to stop him from dying due to infection and all the other fun slow ways to die that came with living in the wild. Sarutobi in his right mind shouldn't have promoted him even with Kage Bushin to use as a massive crutch, so Naruto guessed it had to do with the Kyuubi and his parents, whose identity Jiraiya had belated revealed during one of Naruto's manic depressive stints. After beating the old sage to a pulp for not telling him sooner, which was lengthened when Jiraiya was stupid enough to mention he was also his godfather, Naruto had gone on a robot killing spree so he had time to think. Whilst he didn't like the fact that revealing his heritage would have reversed his terrible childhood, the fact that a couple of the Iwa survivors they had managed to rescue had to be restrained from trying to kill him meant it was obviously a good decision in the greater view of things. Wow, I think that might be on par with my shitty teenage years, and no, I don't want to talk about that. Jane's comment brought him back to the conversation that had somehow managed to make both of them talk about their past, which was something Naruto had been quite determined not to do but had failed rather spectacularly at already. No worries, Jane-chan, I won't pry any further, I promise. Now, I think. Yes, let's have another 3 miso ramen and also one of those exotic ramen. He looked back at Jane ready to continue talking when he saw the look of shock on her face as she looked between the 3 already empty bowls in front of him and his stomach. His grin widened as he recognized the look many people had given him when he was younger and had watched him eat. Whilst it wasn't an important thing, he still liked to think of it as a type of prank, and he always enjoyed his pranks. After those 4 bowls of ramen, Naruto decided to take pity on Jane and stop there rather than blow her mind with how much he could truly eat. So after some more light-hearted bantering about the bill, which Naruto liked to think he won with his query about if he paid for it would it count as a date, the meaty bruise from Jane's shocked swat to the face well worth it for the blush he managed to bring out. The fact she felt guilty about it was definitely a bonus as his advantage would last longer than the actual damage given his healing factor, and having your effective boss feeling like she owes you something was pretty much never a bad idea. Their return to the Normandy from the Presidium was interrupted by his name being called out through the rather quiet evening crowds, Naruto recognizing Nerali Badia as she approached with a middle-aged man of a similar skin complexion in close pursuit. Naruto, excuse me Naruto, oh, sorry Spectre, I didn't mean to interrupt your business. Nerali had obviously not seen Jane when she had called out to him, and whilst Nerali seemed uncaring about Jane's new status, the man with her gasped in slight shock before giving a bow. Jane seemed to do her best not to get irritated at the interruption and undisguised awe from the man with Nerali and the other humans who had heard her shout. In an attempt to move the attention and conversation onwards, Naruto stepped forwards between the 3 of them and bowed slightly to Nerali. Hello there Nerali-chan, I am glad to see the last of your injuries have healed up now, what can I do for you? Nerali smiled genially at him before returning his bow, subtly elbowing the man with her into doing the same. I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you again for saving me on Eden Prime. With everything that is going on, I didn't really get a chance. Also, this is my husband Samesh. He wanted to try and get you to talk me out of accompanying you on the Normandy as Dr. Chakwa's assistant, if you will have me, Spectre. The now introduced Samesh was quick to follow up Nerali's comment, wringing his hands together anxiously as he did so. You're no soldier Nerali, it is bad enough you went to Eden Prime with Geth Attack, until I got your message I thought I had lost you. Now you wish to join the Spectre's entourage and go back into danger? Please Spectre, can you make her see reason? The man's impassioned plea was better than Naruto had actually expected. Many people in his position would let their fears and worries turn into anger far too easily. I know I am no soldier, but other than Commander Shepard, Naruto here and a few others, I actually have experience of dealing with the aftermath of a Geth Attack. I helped both on Eden Prime and also when Dr. Chakwas was dealing with the injured servicemen on the way back to the Citadel. Nerali's similarly impassioned outburst garnered even more attention than her shout of Spectre had, many people stopping and starting to listen to the unfolding argument even as Nerali continued, her voice lowering as she looked pleadingly at Jane. Please Spectre, after all that I have been through I want to be useful, rather than just stand aside and cower until it is too late. Given the number of Geth and the size of that ship, Eden Prime cannot be the only colony they're going to attack. I am a fully trained Dr. Spectre and have high scores in basic training, it's why I was posted to Eden Prime. Nerali made a good point and no doubt there would be an awful lot of wagging tongues and extranet posts in the aftermath of this either way. Naruto was all for Nerali joining them, she knew his secret after all, so keeping her on the Normandy made tactical sense as well as her being one of his few friends thus far. Also, given the scene around them, she had just made herself a target if Saren felt like getting any more information about what happened on Eden Prime. Given the grim look on Jane's face, she probably had realized the same thing. Mr. Badia, I understand your concerns, but I assure you that the safest place for your wife to be during this will be on the Normandy. Based on what we know about the fugitive who is working with the Geth, he has an anti-human sentiment that means he will be wanting to target any of the survivors from Eden Prime that might have information related to him. The point made Samesh look even more anxious, and Naruto could tell he was about to become unreasonable. So in an attempt to mitigate the messy marital argument to come as well as reinforce the fake image of his honor-bound sense of duty, Naruto spoke up in his best confident manner. Badia-san, your concern for your wife is touching, but she became a doctor because she wanted to help people. You can't stop her from doing that without trying to stop her being herself. And besides, she will be safe on the ship and I will keep an eye on her. She owes me for saving her life and I won't let anything happen to one of my friends. He had thought about saying something about keeping an eye on her until she could pay him back, but that wouldn't help calm Samesh down in all likelihood. Samesh was obviously surprised by his input, no doubt due to his age more than anything else, but it seemed that it had managed to calm the man down to the point he was realizing he wasn't going to win this particular fight. With the man seemingly convinced, Nirali seemed much happier and they continued to talk for a few more minutes before Jane made her excuses about having to get back to the ship, which Naruto took as their cue to leave. She did flash him a two-fingered hand signal with her left hand whilst they were saying their goodbyes, which was part of the code they had been working on given his more unique abilities. It was still fairly basic, but if Jane indicated with her left hand, she was indicating a number of clones up to 5 that she wanted scouting the area, or in this case keeping an eye of the bodies. If she used her right hand, then she wanted batches of 5 clones based on the number of fingers. These would be used more for straight-up area denial or combat if they were alone or with those they could trust. So as they departed, Naruto used the rather massed crowds to slip away into the side alleys and from there the higher levels of the citadel. Now out of the way and unlikely to be spotted, Naruto formed the hand sign that was so familiar to him now it almost felt as natural as breathing. He created 20 clones, pointing at 2 of them to indicate which ones he wanted to follow the bodies. The surplus clones would spread out and see if they could follow the already dispersing gossip back to anyone linked with Saren. Not that he thought any of it would. Most of the clones had only gathered information relating to various small gangs and their activities aboard the station, which he planned on compiling and giving into the executor later. He shifted back to Jane, no one any the wiser, ready to head back to the Normandy in an attempt to get to know their new team. Then suddenly an idea came to him about how to use his information and Jane's new status in a way that would definitely help both of them. Jane Tycho. Obviously his use of the more official suffix and grin told more of a tale than he thought it would. Jane looking at him a little warily even as she replied. Yes, Naruto? Oh yes, Naruto was going to enjoy explaining this one. Line break, 30 crates of red sand, dozens of illegal weapons and mods, 14 smugglers and what's left of their hired muscle, the list goes on. Yes, Jane concluded. Naruto had been right when he had said that the executor wasn't going to be happy with them, probably the reason the blonde ninja had found excuses not to be here for it. Palin seemed undecided between apocalyptic anger or frustrated approval of their actions, which was reasonable Jane thought with hindsight as her team had very much rocked the Citadel boat as it were. Palin had been listing the items her teams had delivered or secured for C-Sec in what Naruto had jokingly termed Operation Teamwork. Jane had to give the young man credit, he was definitely unorthodox in his ideas and they were generally very good ones. The amount of data on gangs and other criminals his small but widespread clone network had gathered was astounding and definitely gave her enough targets, but as they soon discovered that was a limiting factor in and about itself. The sheer volume meant that Jane was quickly overwhelmed as she tried to come up with a cohesive target plan, the Naruto clones doing little to distinguish targets by importance or ease of targeting, meaning that she had tried to do it herself. Then she remembered that she had the entire bridge crew of the Normandy available to her and quickly delegated the task to them, suiting up and leading some of the ground forces in order to relieve some of the frustration the data analysis had built up. She had Garrus lead the Alliance Marines that had been seconded to her command, under the watchful eye of Kaden so that he could evaluate his skills to make sure he would be as useful in battle as he would be as an investigator. Jane would have liked to evaluate the Turian herself. Despite the executor's very impressive report, Jane was someone who liked to trust, but verify, but she was busy leading her own strike team of Ashley, Tali and 3 of the other Marines. I am glad that you managed to keep it quiet and had Garrus leading the main team. People are thinking this is a C-Sec operation for now and I think you want to keep it that way, Spectre. Especially given the carnage Uzumaki and his newest compatriot caused in the wards. Ah yes, her new clearing team, Naruto and Rex would probably not have been most people's first choice as a small team, but she had thought that the Krogan's durability and Naruto's speed would work well together. In their defense, Executor, there were no civilian casualties and they did clear their objectives much faster than Garrus' more conventional approach. And why would I want to keep this action a secret, allowing C-Sec to get the glory? Executor Palin looked torn for a moment before he replied with a resigned air that Jane was starting to notice he used a lot when she and Naruto were involved. Primarily because you will cause me and the council a hijack storm of trouble in the media if it gets out that a brand new Spectre can clear up more of the Citadel in one day than my men can do in a month. The idea of pissing the council off was tempting, and it would probably get them working that little bit faster on finding leads for her if there was the implied threat she would just carry on until she had some other direction. And I know the council have probably deserved whatever plot you were planning with that smirk, but I hope that you remember how helpful I have been in your previous adventures before your ascension, and therefore don't want to doom me to dealing with that beyond what you are making me sort out now. Ah, yeah, I would say I am sorry, but I still like to think that I've done you a good turn today. If not, blame your new contractor, it was his idea. If Naruto was going to avoid this meeting, Jane was going to make sure he got at least some of the heat from it. No, it is true that this will make my life a little easier in the long run, and your point about Uzumaki brings me to the second reason you should let this be a CSEC op, and I promise that this will go a long way to leveling the field with your new employer. Have you heard of the Spectre Assistance section in the CSEC Codex? Oh, well, this sounded promising. Pushing herself off the wall she had leant against during Palin's rant about the goods, Jane could smell a good negotiating opportunity rising, and that brought a real smile to her face. Barter and negotiation had been the keystones in her time at the orphanage post-Mindwar and had served her well at the academy. She liked to think she had a knack for it that went beyond just enjoying the victory at the end. By all means, executor, why don't you enlighten me? Judging by the combative grin of the executor's own face, she wasn't the only one who was going to enjoy this. No, they weren't, but it's not like there was a lot they could do other than authorize the payment, as Palin was the one who had reported the results of Operation Sting to them. So now she had more money than she had ever had before in her life, even with the outlays such as fuel and supplies to replace what was used on Eden Prime. And if this doesn't get them to release Saren Tami's files to us, I have some other targets for us to hit tomorrow morning. Automatic data transfer my ass. Speaking of today's work. Naruto walked forwards and held out a datapad, Jane taking it in mild confusion only to find a manifest of goods ranging from medical supplies to weapons. I had a bunch of hanged clones follow behind me and Rex, and they took everything that wasn't nailed down. Getting to the part where things like turret remnants were included, Jane got the feeling that Naruto was being sarcastic about the nailed part. All of the obviously illegal stuff I handed into CSEC, the rest is being held in your newly acquired warehouse area. One of the smugglers had the deed. And the warehouse owner was comfortable with you signing the deed over on my behalf without the smuggler even being charged yet? She had a suspicion about how Naruto had pulled that off, which was confirmed when he reached up and scratched the back of his head a little awkwardly. Well, I might have had a clone hanged as you tell him exactly what we had hit on the Citadel so far, and how it would be a shame if we searched certain areas of his warehouse that I had found were owned by some of the other people we hit today. The Turian was pretty damn quick to help us sign things over after that. Shepard couldn't help but shake her head at the rather heavy-handed approach Naruto had used in intimidating the warehouse owner, but it wasn't like he had done anything illegal, other than pretending to be her so that all the other illegal things became legal, of course. Well, the smuggler will eventually petition for his damn space back, assuming he doesn't mind pissing me off to do it, but having somewhere to store things such as these in the meantime will be very useful. But seriously, Naruto, I am going to need you to start telling me before you do things like this, especially if you are going to pretend to be me to do it. Jane didn't mean to be harsh with him. After all, this equipment would allow her to outfit another strike force if she needed to and still increase her money by a noticeable amount. But she needed to make sure that she wasn't going to catch any flack for what he was doing whilst he was hanged as her. If the council knew about his transformation abilities, then they would probably lock him up in a dark hole and throw away the key. It bypassed most basic security on the Citadel and could allow him to incriminate almost anyone, which would doubly worry the council given his rather cool attitude towards them. Hi Tycho, I'm sorry. I will definitely check in with you if I can in future. Not exactly a straight-up promise, but it would do for now. The results far outweighed the potential cost. Commander. The council are on the line and they say it can't wait. Shall I patch them through, or are you going to the meeting room for a face-to-face chat? As tempting as it was to see their faces if this was the meeting she thought it was, Shepard couldn't be bothered to traipse up there for what would undoubtedly be a very short call. Patch them through, Joker. I doubt they will be long. And of course there was the other advantage, Jane thought to herself as she moved to her chair, whose position was optimized for audio quality. A bit of backup never hurt anyone. Ready to go, Jane Tycho? Naruto had moved up behind her with his usual silent footstep, the young ninja obviously just as eager to hear what the council had to offer. Seeing the call was from 3 separate lines, not surprising given the time of day, Jane had an amusing if slightly unrealistic thought even as she pressed the accept button. Would the other 2 believe her if she claimed she couldn't connect to the Turian counselor due to technical difficulties? #*+= We are full, Commander Shepard. The words from Presley would probably surprise most people who had seen the Normandy. The ship, whilst small for a frigate, was still large enough to fit an entire marine detachment and their transports on top of its normal loadout. It was almost the same size as the MSV Ontario that was currently floating across the readouts in front of her. So we have filled the cargo bay. Not surprising given that we picked up those 2 troop transports and several tons of thresher maw meat from Edalus. It would have passed most people by that any part of a thresher maw was useful, but after an offhand comment from Rex about the meat being a sought-after Krogan delicacy, Jane had saw an opportunity. Not just the cargo bay, That has the transports and the light mako you got from those pirates along with the meat and some of the weapons, but I am talking most of the rest of the space on the ship as well. I have already had to fill half the engine room and the medbay supply room with the weapons and other equipment that your teams have acquired, not to mention the thresher maw acid that Naruto was so determined we harvest. So a different level of full to what she had thought he meant. Jane wasn't really offended by the slightly accusatory tone in Presley's voice. She had been a hoarder for years and a miser for even longer than that. The only time she let things go was for money. And if she wanted to try and justify it objectively, considering the amount of supplies that many of the Terminus pirate bases had, if she had left them there she was just facilitating another group's easy start in their shady careers. Back to the Citadel then Presley. Whilst we could try one of the local colonies, I think we need to get the bodies back to Kahoku as soon as possible. Presley saluted and moved away to give Joker the new order, leaving Jane to open her own comm channel to the member of the crew that would be most likely to help her a little further. Garrus, can I talk to you regarding the Citadel for a minute please? Where are you based now? The question was as much for her own benefit as it was being polite. Garrus had originally taken up residence in the cargo bay along with Ashley and Rex, but if they were as full as Presley was alluding to then she doubted that was still the case. I'm currently in the mess, Commander, though Rex wanted to talk to you about our sleeping arrangement anyway, so do you want me to here? Rex had probably been much less polite about the damn thing, but Garrus was remarkably soft-spoken given his dossier and experience in C-Sec. Of course, we're heading back to the Citadel now so that we can clear the hold sooner rather than later, but I guess this is more of a question of long-term cargo space? There was a grunt of approval, probably from Rex, as Jane tried to think of a way around the problem. I will be down in a moment, Garrus. I just need to contact someone with an idea I have just had. The Ontario was slightly damaged from the Guardian laser fire used to disable its engines, and though it would be stretching things a bit thin given the Normandy was already running a light human crew, she had someone who excelled at dealing with manpower issues. Naruto, how do you feel about learning to crew a ship? #**+= it had not been an easy return to the Citadel, but with Presley piloting the Ontario and 2 other crew managing Naruto and his clones it had been a lot easier to pull off than she had thought it might be. Alerting the Alliance to the damage to the Ontario's engines, Jane was pleased to hear of a quick response allowing her to use one of the shipyard docks to land the Ontario for repair, whilst the Normandy landed and most of the crew were involved in unloading the various equipment and items from it. Garrus had known exactly who they could sell most of the good weapons and armor to. C-Sec in fact, as they were constantly having to obtain new equipment to replace broken, stolen or lost equipment of their own. Executor Palin had been remarkably reasonable about the whole thing as well, and Jane had walked away with a confirmation of sale and C-Sec crews already on their way to take the items away from the Normandy docks. The Thresher Maw meat had been a bit more difficult to part with, taking Naruto a couple of hours to find several restaurants and bars in the lower wards that catered quite heavily towards Krogan. Though once she made them aware of quite how much Thresher Maw meat she had there was quite some competition between them to take it off her hands. Supposedly Thresher meat was quite hardy when it came to preservation and difficult to get hold of, so the restaurants were obviously trying to buy up the meat to give them stock for some time to come. So she had made more than enough to pay the Alliance for the repairs to the Ontario, as another ship was very quickly agreed to be the best solution for their cargo problem, but now she had to consider getting a crew for the ship. She had asked the others and most had been unable to help, though Tali had raised the point that there were dozens of Quarians on the Citadel that would jump at the chance for work, even if it was something as menial and crewing and running a salvage ship in the wake of the Normandy. They have all been truthful as far as I can tell, Shepherd Tycho, though with their masks on all the time it would be quite hard to tell if they didn't exaggerate every little body gesture to make up for it. Which had led to where they were now. Tali having spread the word that they were looking for a crew and would accept Quarians meant that the office Naruto had given the address for applicants to go to had been packed by the time Jane had arrived to see who had turned up. She got the feeling that the office was probably another one of the things he had acquired during his time on the Citadel, but given he hadn't told her anything about it other than it was legally rented out, Jane didn't push any harder given it meant that they didn't have to use the Normandy's hangar. Well, I think we only need 20 to crew the ship and collect the salvage, so we are going to have to pick out the best. You and Tali got any recommendations? Naruto nodded slowly and pointed over to a group that Tali was stood with off to one side, maybe 30 or so of them. Tali-chan says these ones have particular skills that you would be looking for, Shepherd Tycho, whilst all Quarians have experience shipside these actually served on ship crews in various fields. Jane nodded, though it did pull at her heartstrings to see so many people who were obviously so desperate for any kind of work that they responded to what was essentially a vague word-of-mouth job advert, especially given she would be sending most of them away without anything. Everyone, thank you for coming to the interviews. As we have kept you for some time, food is served. The tall blonde woman that made that announcement, who looked suspiciously like Naruto but female without the whisker marks, announced this as she and 2 other people brought in packs of dextro paste. The Quarians seemed torn between caution and shock, obviously not used to this kind of hospitality from someone other than their own race. It took Tali walking forwards, and rather awkwardly feeding one of the packs into the complex apparatus that worked to move the food to her mouth without breaking sterilization, to make the other Quarians realize that this wasn't some kind of trick. Jane turned a knowing glance in Naruto's direction, the young man merely shrugging as the two understood exactly why he had gone out and bought enough food to feed 200 people on a whim without the need for words. Now knowing his past as an orphan, one that was not well liked if the story regarding this Mizuki was anything near the norm, Jane saw his actions in a different light. Despite his obvious reluctance to get close to anyone other than herself, it was the things like this and when he stood in front of Tali at the council, that revealed that despite his irritating and sarcastic humor he was not only a genocide survivor as he wanted to portray himself. Watching as he blushed and stammered a protest as Tali glomped him, the young Quarian also seemingly in on the secret of where the food had come from, Jane couldn't help but smile as a fellow orphan struggled to accept the probably unexpected affection and appreciation. Now she knew exactly what to do the next time he tried to goad her with a comment about trying to date her. #*+ equals it was quiet aboard the Normandy, something Tali was still not at all used to as she walked the halls aimlessly, a mixture of excitement and longing mixing in her stomach and preventing her sleeping for the moment. The giddiness of being able to help some of her own people on their pilgrimage, even if it was only on Shepard's behalf and only 23 of them, was something that gave her a warm feeling that she really didn't want to try and shake anytime soon. Though, with that feeling came the longing that she couldn't help but feel even though it made her feel extremely guilty every time she thought about it. Despite all that Shepard had done for her in taking her on her ship and letting her be part of her team, Tali could tell that Jane didn't trust her any more than she seemed to trust Garrus or Rex. Whilst most Quarians weren't very good with facial expressions or body language, her father had been very insistent in her learning some psychology before leaving the flotilla and the signs were there, even if Shepard didn't realize she was doing it. It was understandable, they had only met a week ago after all, but it was the sort of feeling that subconsciously filtered down throughout the rest of the crew. The feeling of distrust was painfully clear to her, and was one of the reasons she kept herself to engineering during the day. When most of the crew were active, Engineer Adams was a lot nicer to her after she helped with the engines a few times. So now that there was another ship accompanying Shepard, crewed by her own kind who were beyond thankful at the opportunity she had offered them, Tali couldn't help but want to request permission to join them. The feeling was quickly squashed once more though, after all there were the upsides to being on a ship like the Normandy, especially given its rather exotic crew. Tali-chan, are you okay? The sudden question brought Tali tumbling to a stop, both mentally and physically as the subject of her thoughts spoke to her from where he was doing pull-ups on a makeshift workout area in the corner of the cargo bay. Ah, yes Naruto. Sorry, just lost in my thoughts. Her subconscious must have been following her thoughts more than she could have imagined if her feet had taken her to the one place that Naruto was likely to be found. She only hoped that he couldn't tell she was embarrassed, doing her best not to exhibit her embarrassment physically as was standard between Quarians, doing her best to think of something to talk about quickly before she got any worse. No need to apologize Tali-chan, I do that a lot, especially when I think about ramen. Swinging himself forwards, Naruto let go at the apex of his swing and flipped through air and landed less than 2 feet of her, causing her to jump slightly in shock as he stood before smiling apologetically. Ah, sorry Tali-chan, I should probably have given you a little warning there. For the second time in a minute Tali's mind stopped thinking ahead, as she couldn't stop herself taking in the image in front of her. Stood only in a pair of standard fatigue pants, Tali could definitely say that Naruto was the most well-built man she had ever seen topless this close, though a rather snide part of her brain was quick to point out he was the only man. Well-defined muscles were easily visible on his stocky frame but he wasn't hulking, as she thought the phrase was. Her blush faded slightly when she started paying attention to the scars that littered his arms and chest. In some places there were signs of scars formed on top of other scars. Tali-chan. Oh right, not really used to people being bothered by this still. Stepping off to grab his plain white t-shirt, Tali mentally complained even as she did her best to recover what little composure she had left. So, is there anything you wanted me for Tali-chan? Or would you prefer me to leave you to it? I was done for the night now if you wanted to have a go. Tali shook her head rapidly. Having seen Naruto working out in the area on several occasions there was no way she was going to embarrass herself by doing her training with him still there. No thank you Naruto. I don't want to try and work out this late at night, would probably mean I would be awake all night. I just wanted to thank you for helping my people today with the Ontario. I know most people would have tried to get a human crew instead. I will just go and work on Chadaka a little more. A good save rather than the real reason, but the frown that crossed Naruto's face implied she hadn't pulled it off as well as she would like to think she had. Anyo, but shouldn't you work on your close-quarter skills as well Tali-chan? What happens if someone catches you unarmed and too close for you to sabotage them? Whilst normally Tali would have taken offense at what was an insinuation that Naruto thought she would be useless in close combat, she had talked to Rex after their mission on the Citadel and knew that even the veteran Krogan approved of the young man's martial abilities, which was a big compliment from a Krogan. I would keep them busy until I made enough space to draw my weapon or sabotage them without being caught in the blast radius. Not the most confident of answers, and being honest with herself, Tali knew that if she got into a melee with anyone that had more than a modicum of melee ability, the chances of her getting out of that fight alive, let alone without suit damage, were very low indeed. Show me then. Gone was the cheerful expression and relaxed postured, Naruto sliding into a stance she didn't recognize with a deadpan look of concentration on his face. But Naruto. She didn't get any further than that, Naruto moving quickly forwards and throwing a left jab at her face. It was obvious that he was holding back considerably, the stiffness of his body showing that it wanted to move faster and that he was doing his best to hold it in check, but Tali still only just managed to bring her arm up to block the attack. Even with Naruto pulling his punches, her arm smarted as Naruto shifted once more, speaking to her as he went to another attack. Your legs are too close together, widen your stance to help with the stability of your defense. It took Tali a moment to realize he was being serious, ducking a roundhouse kick that would have taken her straight out of the fight if it had connected before she did so, smiling to herself despite the situation as Naruto nodded approvingly. Do not block attacks if at all possible, deflect or avoid the attack altogether to throw your opponent off balance. And so she ducked and dodged as best she could, though there were still far too many attacks that she had been forced to block, the aching in her arms and legs smarting every time she moved, even as Naruto eventually got her to switch to offense, blocking each and every one of her attacks like it was the easiest thing in the world. She didn't know quite how long they were at it, not having had her HUD display on in order to conserve her suit's energy, but by the end of it she was drenched in sweat and aching from every joint. Despite this though, she felt happy for the first time that evening, as Naruto relaxed and smiled approvingly at her. Well done, Tali-chan, you have improved significantly there. The warm feeling that had first appeared when Naruto had stepped in to defend her from the council resurfaced at the smile. And even though Tali wasn't sure that she would actually be able to make it back to her bunk, she knew she would sleep well tonight. And perhaps, as much as her body was already complaining at the idea, she would see if she could turn this into a more regular training session. After all, a few bruises and aching muscles would be totally worth it if somebody did ever try and take her on in close combat only for her to surprise them with her new skills. That, and another chance to hang around with Naruto, wasn't something she would pass up if she could avoid it. Jane Taiko, I don't want you to take this the wrong way. Naruto was forced to pause his attempt at conversation, as the world hadn't quite stopped spinning enough for him to be comfortable talking, unless he wanted possible throwing up to go with it. What's the matter? Your first vehicle combat mission too much for you? Jane's grin as she exited the Mako did nothing to improve Naruto's mood. No, the Geth I could handle, even those big walker things of theirs. What came far closer to killing me was. Well, I wouldn't call it driving, as I'm sure even I could do better than that, and I've never been behind the wheel before. That comment, which he had to admit was more cutting than usual even for him, merely caused Jane to chuckle before indicating around her. You are more than welcome to walk next time, Naruto, and besides, you don't see Rex or Tali complaining. There was a disgruntled bark from the Krogan warlord even as he debunked from the Mako and shook his head repeatedly. I wasn't complaining, as I think near-death situations are good for the soul, though I will admit that's the most roughed up I have been since that time on Omega, good times. And the little one isn't complaining because she knows if she does open her mouth she will vomit. And trust me, cleaning vomit from the inside of your suit is not a fun job. The fact that Rex only tended to find fighting, training and fighting fun was usually meant his opinions on matters were usually defunct, but as Tali's upper body flopped out of the Mako and she looked in their direction with a rather pitiful moan. Keela, why are we still spinning? After a few moments more she seemed to regain enough awareness to actually get fully out of the Mako, though her footing was still a little unsteady as she dropped down next to Naruto, who quickly grabbed her arm to help her stabilize. And Rex? Why am I the little one? Naruto is smaller than me. Tali was obviously trying to distract herself from her queasiness, but Naruto still gave her a playful jab with his elbow as Rex chuckled before pointing at Naruto. That's because he can take out 3 armed men with just his fists. That's the kind of person you don't want to call little. Not to his face anyways. The 3 of them chuckled before Jane coughed in warning. That will do, let's get up to the ruins as fast as we can. The Geth are here so we don't know what we are going to face. Naruto, I want you to scout ahead, do not engage unless you are sure you can handle it quietly. Naruto nodded, catching the instruction not to use clones unless he had to. Jane clenching her fists as she spoke to relay the message. Whilst there were a few people who knew the extent of his abilities, the less he showed them off the better. Hi Jane Taiko, and with that he was off, moving lightly up the ravine path as the others carried on speaking, stopping when he was out of sight to activate the most useful jutsu Ero Sennin had taught him. The transparency jutsu was technically only classed as a D-rank jutsu, but Ero Sennin had modified his version of it substantially to aid in his peeping, and it was the modifications that deadened sounds and cloaked the body's heat signature that made it so useful against the metal men. Naruto hadn't tested it on the Geth yet, but as he rounded the next turn and came almost face to face with a Geth trooper, positioned there as some kind of sentry no doubt. Given the lack of reaction as Naruto stopped in his tracks and fell into a fighting stance, the trooper hadn't seen him, so Naruto crept round the back of the trooper before summoning his spear. Fast movements dispelled the technique, which was why Ero Sennin was usually caught after someone got suspicious, and summoning Kushina from his seals caused the jutsu to fail in a similar manner. The trooper didn't notice though, allowing Naruto to prepare himself, before impaling the trooper through the back of the head with a single stroke. The Geth collapsed with a clunk, Naruto quickly resealing Kushina and reactivating the transparency jutsu, moving on quickly to check that there were no other Geth in the area that might come and investigate the sound. Luckily no one seemed to have noticed, so Naruto reached up to his ear to report in. Jane Taiko, they had a guard set just up the path, it's down but from the looks of things I doubt that is the last of them. Moving up to find the camp. Jane was smirking, he could tell that even when he wasn't able to see her face he could tell. It's almost like they knew we were coming. Good work Naruto, keep us informed. Resisting the urge to growl at his commander's tone, Naruto merely carried moving forwards up towards the plateau their intel highlighted as being the research camp they were hoping to find Benezia's daughter. He dealt with two more Geth, who were waiting near the top of the ravine path in obvious position for an ambush, before reaching the top. The camp was slightly downhill from where he had emerged, amidst the two-story ruins which had been the original find, allowing him to assess what was waiting for them before the others arrived. Creeping forwards, Naruto counted at least a dozen Geth soldiers, stood around corpses of what must have been the research team. Shepherd Taiko, I am at the camp. Naruto paused as his sixth sense twinged a moment before his ears picked up a scrabbling sound. It took a moment, far too long given his past, but Naruto realized a little too late that the sound was coming from above him. Throwing caution to the wind, Naruto leapt backwards despite the fact doing so would blow his cover, but was just a fraction of a second too slow. The bright red laser slammed into his armor, bypassing his shields like they weren't even there, his dodge meaning that he only caught half of the beam as the rest burned a hole in the ground. They've spotted me, don't know how but I am pulling back, keep an eye up high people. Naruto didn't turn back to try and spot his attacker, too busy dodging and ducking around the fire that quickly began to strafe him from the other Geth in the area, the Geth dropship that had been plaguing them since their arrival on Therum appearing on the horizon several moments later. Naruto, status report, given the dropship and the weapons fire we can hear, you've kicked the hornet's nest this time. Are you safe? The concern in Jane's voice was touching given her general blasé attitude, but Naruto had bigger things to think about at that moment, making it into cover by the ravine entrance just in time, left arm in agony from where the laser had hit him. Just fucking peachy, I always enjoy getting shot and then having a tank get dropped in on my position, so the sooner you guys get here the sooner we can start the party. He knew he would probably regret the sarcasm and potty mouth later, but when living with a bunch of seasoned ninja, swearing was the best possible vice he could have picked up. The tank he was referring to was another one of those Geth walkers, the massive contraption rearing up in its now familiar manner to rain plasma upon what little cover he had. Leaping up, Naruto shifted away from the area the others would be arriving from into some of the ruins. Hopefully this would prevent them from being pinned down. 2 minutes out Naruto, just keep yourself alive understand. We can talk about embarrassing Tali with your language, and how you are going to make it up to her later. There was a muffled exclamation, probably from Tali about Shepard's comment, which actually distracted Naruto from the pain slightly as he ducked under the ball of plasma that had just erupted from the walker in front of him. Drawing one of his pistols as he heard the light skittering noise above him again, Naruto's paranoia proved spot on as he saw a gray-skinned Geth clamber round the corner on the ceiling, eye stalk glowing in the same shade of red as the laser that had injured him earlier. With Naruto knowing it was coming now, the shot was relatively easy to dodge, leaving the thing attempting to backpedal rapidly away from him. Raising the pistol with a smirk on his face, Naruto couldn't help but feel a little vengeful, but that was all right in his book. People who were vengeful usually had the best arcs in the anime that he had read as a child, so that meant he was just becoming that little bit more awesome, right? Pound $% caret and asterisk, damn Naruto, you really were not happy with these guys were you? By the time she and the others had made it to the top of the canyon the fighting had been pretty much over, only the Geth walker still standing as Naruto flitted from cover to cover firing potshots at it with his pistols. You have one of them sneak up on you and shoot you in the back Jane Taiko. I assure you it will do wonders for your outlook on the situation. Jane couldn't help but smile at her subordinate's acerbic reply. Stress really did bring out a different person from underneath that charismatic and friendly front that he put up to everyone. She found she rather enjoyed the difference. You did this whilst injured. You keep impressing me, human, though I suppose your regeneration and backup organs helped. Rex's comment would have gotten some odd looks from the other three if they hadn't been advancing forwards whilst firing on the walker, so instead there was just an awkward silence for a few moments before Jane decided she should clear up the confusion. Rex. Humans don't have defunct organs or fast regeneration. The Krogan warlord paused behind a rock and looked around at the half a dozen Geth corpses, confusion shifting to delight a moment later, raising himself over the top of the rock to utilize his shotgun's carnage ability at the walker. Oh, that just makes things even better. No more scouting, Brad. You and I are going to have a proper contest. As Rex vaulted the cover and charged towards the now beleaguered walker, Jane realized that this contest was probably linked to levels of devastation and kill counts, meaning that these ruins would probably not survive the coming onslaught. Then she thought about it for a moment and grinned to herself, looking round the camp at all the leftover supplies and Geth parts even as the walker keeled over from Rex's body, slamming into one of its legs. Let the boys have their fun for now. There were other things she could focus on instead. Shepherd to the Normandy. I want you to come into atmosphere and provide cover whilst the Ontario collects the Geth salvage we have built up, along with any other useful items they find along the way. You will need to send Beta Team to collect the Mako, as we've left it at the bottom of the hill the camp is on. We will proceed inside to grab the target, assuming that Naruto and Rex didn't end up trying to offer to finish their competition. Competition Commander. Jane looked over to where Rex had just blasted the walker repeatedly in the eye, even as it tried to stand before falling limply to the ground, Naruto having moved on towards the entrance to the ruins with Tali following somewhat confusedly behind. Probably better if you don't ask, Joker. Naruto gunned down the first Geth who tried to exit the ruins, shouting something to Rex that she didn't quite hear, but the warlord's roared reply was almost terrifying. What do you mean it only counts as $1 % caret and asterisk? Hello? Can you hear me out there? I am trapped and need help. Naruto had seen her long before he had gotten close enough for her to call out to him. Half a dozen of his clones hidden along the walls of the large cavern they had descended into just in case of a trap, his gaze settling on her and confirming that this was indeed their target. Dr. Tizoni-san, I presume. A good idea with the shield. These Geth haven't been much fun to deal with. Having cleared the Geth in the camp with a rather hurried and judicious use of clones, Naruto had not expected or enjoyed the following contest with Rex, the Krogan quickly catching up to his score in the dark tunnels. The Krogan seemed to enjoy the contest even if Naruto was severely restricted in what he could do, and the Geth had been much less of a problem once the Krogan had waded into them. Satisfied that the team would distract the remaining Geth, Naruto had slipped off despite Rex's protests, though the Krogan was placated by the opportunity to kill most of the remaining Geth himself. Judging by the large piece of equipment the Geth had been moving into position, Naruto had been right to move ahead. Dealing with them had been easy even when concealing his chakra powers. This, Dr. Tizoni made a slight indication to the way her body seemed to be fixed in place in the air. This wasn't actually the idea. It seems to be some kind of Prothean security device, must have activated when I activated the barrier to protect myself. To Naruto's slight surprise, Dr. Tizoni seemed more curious about her situation than concerned or worried, her face similar to when Naruto had asked Sakura or one of the others a question they had to think about before answering. Well, Dr. Tizoni, I think we can have a look at how it works later. Let me just let the rest of my team know I have found you. The Asari didn't even react, obviously still mulling over her thoughts on the security system, so Naruto activated his comms unit. Jane Taiko, I have found Tizoni-san. If you can stop Rex from just trying to kill everything that moves and head back to the fork where I left you, I have marked the path and made sure there are no active Geth. Using clones to map out the ruins had been far quicker than trying to do it by himself. It was just common sense. Very good, Naruto. Rex just found a larger red one to play with, but I am sure you will be finished with it soon. Is Dr. Tizoni unharmed? The unspoken question of whether she had been working with or hiding from the Geth went unsaid. She is currently stuck in some kind of stasis thing behind an energy barrier, Taiko. The Geth were trying to break into where she currently is but hadn't succeeded from what I could tell. The lack of descriptive words Naruto had for what he was seeing was really starting to annoy him, and he resolved to find a dictionary and see if it could help improve his word range. Okay, Naruto, we are on our way. Keep an eye out for any stragglers. Naruto chuckled as he heard Rex shout something in the background of Shepard's line, but the Krogan didn't come on to tell Naruto what he had said. Oh, I am sorry, I got a little distracted. The Geth. You must be careful out there. I was just doing some investigation when the warning of a Geth attack came from the camp. I hid in here and activated the barriers before they got down here. I knew the barriers would keep them out. But the Geth? Beyond the veil? Can you believe it? Naruto nodded to himself even as he considered his reply. Her excitement was too genuine and too out of the blue for her to know what the Geth had done on Eden Prime, meaning that it was becoming beyond unlikely that she was linked with her mother and Saren. I can believe it, Tizoni-san. I have killed 37 of them to reach you. I would also advise you do not show such excitement when Jane Tycho gets here. The Geth attacked a planet called Eden Prime which we helped clear before coming here. A lot of humans died in the attack. The look of anguish that entered Liara's face was so genuine that Naruto actually felt bad for his blunt warning. I apologize, I did not mean to be excited at the Geth's actions. It is just a wonderful scientific opportunity to learn about a race that haven't left the Perseus Vale in over 300 years. And may I ask, what is your name, human? And please call me Liara, nobody has referred to me by my surname in several decades. Naruto was still getting used to the idea that some of the races in the galaxy considered a period equal to a human's life expectancy to the equivalent of a short period of time, managing to focus on her question instead. The name is Uzumaki Naruto Liara-san, and I am sure that given the number we have taken down so far you can join Tali-chan in investigating the remains. But first I think Jane Tycho will have some questions for you when she gets here. So how do I turn this barrier off so I can come give you a hand? Liara looked at him in confusion for a moment before tilting her head to indicate an interface on the inside of the barrier. Ah, that could be slightly more problematic than Naruto had anticipated. No matter, just because the Geth hadn't been able to work out a way in didn't mean he couldn't. His optimism lasted until Jane and the others arrived. The only progress he had made was working out that he really didn't want to try and force his way through the barrier physically. He could have probably used the body replacement jutsu with a clone, but he didn't want to reveal his abilities, especially given Liara's fascination with new technology, races she didn't yet understand. No luck, Naruto? Jane's question prompted a subconscious growl of frustration from him. He would have had a much easier time if he could just use some jutsu. No, Jane Tycho. Though Liara-san does tell me that the thing a couple of floors down that the Geth were trying to set up is a mining laser, not quite sure what that is exactly, but she seems pretty sure that it should work. Jane looked at him for a moment before gesturing to Rex and Tali. You two go and secure the mining laser whilst I have a chat with Dr. Tizoni. Naruto can make sure there are no stragglers following us up. Rex grouched about interrupting his contest again, but moved off a moment later with Tali in his wake. I don't know what Naruto has told you yet, but I am Commander Jane Shepard of the Council Spectres, in pursuit of a rogue spectre by the name of Saren who has allied with the Geth to bring about the return of a race called the Reapers. Your mother is known to be working with him, and given the Geth attack on your dig site and their efforts to get through to you, you are obviously involved in all this somehow. The only question is, which side? Naruto was always slightly surprised when Jane put her work face on, but Liara seemed more confused than anything else, which made sense with what he had gleaned from their interactions thus far. I am not on anybody's side. I have no idea what you are talking about. I haven't spoken to Benezia in years, decades in fact. We are nothing alike. I promise I know nothing of what she is up to. Please just get me out of here. Nothing deceitful in her tone of voice, though body language was hard to discern when she could only move her head, Naruto giving a small nod when Jane glanced at him to give his taciturn support. It's not as if he wouldn't be keeping an eye on her all the time anyway, and given his particular set of skills, Naruto was sure if she did turn out to be a plant then he would catch misdeeds quickly enough. Very well, since Naruto believes you I will do so as well. Naruto, would you be able to get inside without us needing the mining laser? That sort of question meant that Jane was giving him permission to use his abilities if he needed to, though Naruto was still wary of showing off too many skills. Hi, I think I do. Disappearing from Liara's sight by taking a few quick steps to the left, Naruto motioned for one of his hidden clones to try and Kawarimi into the room. The clone performed the seal, and then there was a small thud as the loose debris he had seen inside the room landed where the clone had been hidden. Jumping up to where the clone had been, so as to avoid the eventual questions of how there were two of him hanging around, Naruto activated his comm so that he could speak just to Shepard. Jane Tycho, my clone is inside the tower and I will switch with him if the opportunity arises. Hopefully Liara-san can walk him through deactivating that shield. Otherwise, we might need that mining laser after all. $% and asterisk. Surrender, or don't. That would be more fun. Jane shook her head. The day had been long enough as it was without the bloodthirsty Krogan and his Geth sidekicks trying to spoil the end of it. I don't think so. You see, the good doctor doesn't seem happy to see you and I really do not have time for this. In fact, Jane was surprised to see the previously passive and polite Asari look positively murderous at the sight of the Krogan, bionics flaring slightly as she spat out a reply of her own. You killed Sierra and Falx in front of me, monster. The Krogan just shrugged at the aggression as several more Geth flitted into the room. You wouldn't come out. I tried to persuade you, not my problem. Saren wants you though, and what Saren wants, he gets. Obviously that line was meant to be witty, intimidating, but the attempted effect was lessened by an argument Jane could hear getting louder from behind her. He should be worth at least 5, he is the obvious leader of this entire group. Naruto's rather loud comment drew everyone's attention even as Rex snorted and shook his head. If the walker only counts as one, he only counts as one, you can't have it both ways, brat. Besides, he looks rather wimpy for Krogan in all honesty. That caused the other Krogan to growl at the insult, gesturing to the surrounding Geth. Kill them all, spare the... The Krogan didn't get any further as he was hit by twin carnage rounds from Rex and Shepard, staggering back just in time to catch Naruto barreling into him with full force. The Geth raised their weapons but Rex was already amongst them, Krogan strength and body weight sending one group to the ground whilst the other was being pelted by Tali and Liara. Discharging her shotgun into a Geth trooper who hadn't made it into cover yet, blowing the thing backwards off the edge of the damaged platform, Shepard saw Naruto fire 3 more rounds from his shotgun into the prone Krogan before moving off to flank the remaining Geth. Even without his abilities, the young man was doing remarkably well considering the technological disadvantages he had, though his reflexes definitely helped. 47 Rex. And there are only 4 left so you can't catch up. Jane's admiration of the ninja's maturity dropped slightly at the obvious provocation. Shouldering her weapon as an enraged Rex barreled into 2 of the remaining enemies, she really didn't want to end up catching the fallout from Rex having lost the contest he had devised. You do realize the armor is probably worse off than I am, right? And stop with the damn needles, woman. Naruto knew that he could probably be a little less bratty about the whole thing. After all, he had been shot and this was the ship's doctor, but in his opinion he didn't need the attention. After the fall of Konoha, medics and other medical staff had been in short supply, and given his regeneration ability, Naruto had always been the one to volunteer out of treatment whenever there had been combat or other medical injuries and illnesses that had arisen. His preference that medics spent their time looking after others less fortunate than him a little hard for him to shake. The fact that he wasn't particularly fond of needles, of any form, after the battle in Wave with Haku definitely had nothing to do with it, honest. Just because your surface wounds have healed, which is still very impressive given the short time span, doesn't mean that your health and general well-being should not be fully investigated, Mr. Uzumaki. We have no records to go off in regards to your unique makeup, so it would be best if I created some now, rather than if you do get seriously injured and I have to guess at how to treat you. The words were stern and made it very clear that Dr. Chakwas was not going to take no as an answer, Naruto's sigh of defeat getting a laugh from Shepard as she watched the Lil exchange from her desk. They were performing the checkup in Shepard's room for 2 reasons. Firstly, because it was a secure location that they could talk about Naruto freely without any of the others hearing under the guise of a debrief from Shepard. And also so that they could sort out the aftermath of the council report at the same time. The council had tried to insist that Shepard use the conference room to contact them, but given that was now where she was bunking Garrus and Rex as well as to put her foot down with them, Shepard insisted that an audio conference in her office was not only easier but more secure now. You better not let any of the council hear about how easily Dr. Chakwas can win arguments with you, Naruto. They might try and hire her office to act as their ambassador solely to you. Though given how impressed they were with our mission, I don't think we need to worry about that for the time being. Even the Turian couldn't find anything to complain about and make it stick. Not for lack of trying, of course. Everything ranging from the deaths of the rest of the dig team to Liara not being handed over to the council in chains had been brought up by the prickly representative. Shepard listening with amusement as the Asari line went mute for a couple of minutes and then the Turian stopped being so blatant with his attempts to sabotage her. Obviously the level-headed ones in the council were trying to avoid antagonizing her if they could help it. We will obviously have to cause them some more trouble in the future, Jane-chan. Can't have them thinking we will be good little minions all of the time. Jane's grin widened slightly and Naruto responded in kind. He had to admit he had been damn lucky to have ended up being woken up when he had been. If he had been stuck with someone like Kaden as a leader, he would probably have mutinied by now. Given it is you, Naruto, I don't think we will need to try very hard. Speaking of potential trouble, how is Liara doing? Naruto thought for a moment, reviewing what the clone he had following Liara had sent him when it had dispersed. It's only been a few hours, Jane-chan. She has been resting in the med bay. Given that she had been in that barrier for a couple of days, I doubt that she will be doing anything else in the near future. Presley is watching the data streams from the access port you have given her. If she does go on the extranet for any reason, we will know, though I imagine he does the same for all of us non-alliance personnel. His educated guess barely fazed Jane, who shrugged unapologetically at him before smiling once more. Standard procedure, especially given the nature of the Normandy. Command are creating non-disclosure agreements for all of you, which I imagine will cause Tali to become quite the annoyance when she hears about it, but this is experimental and classified technology, so I think we can talk her round. Naruto winced as he already knew where this was heading. And by we, You mean, will talk Tali-chan round? Do you not like me all of a sudden, Taiko? Don't forget I am one of those non-alliance members you are meant to be watching after all. What would command say if they heard I was doing your negotiations for you? His ploy to get out of being the messenger nearly worked. Jane's face shifting to her deep thought expression for a few seconds before the proverbial light bulb came on and she glared at him half-heartedly. Nice try, Naruto, but you are still talking to her. She has certainly gelled with you a lot better than she has the rest of the human crew. You can make it clear it's from me, of course, but I think it will be better coming from you. Naruto nodded. The logic was sound even if he didn't like the end result. Hi Jane-chan, when the doctor has finished trying to heal me, I will go talk to her. We'll do another training session as it is. The fact that Tali had approached him about further close combat training really pleased Naruto. He rather liked the shy Quarian, and he also found he rather enjoyed teaching as well. Well, despite the fact that your ungratefulness makes me want to run another batch of tests just to annoy you, I think I am done for now. So, you are free to go, though if I hear any more whining the next time you are in my care, I will start on the invasive diagnostic tests. Damn, Dr. Chakwas was scary when she wanted to be. Naruto quickly deciding it was best to give up the fight rather than risk the veteran doctor actually trying to go through with her threat. Hi, I will be good. Naruto did his best to ignore Jane's continued chuckles as he stood and made his way to the door. Now he just had to find Tali-chan to arrange the training without Rex finding out and trying to join in. $% and asterisk, it was quiet aboard the ship, something Liara greatly appreciated as opposed to the much more crowded and raucous atmosphere she had often experienced whilst traveling with Benezia in her youth. The quiet allowed her to think without distraction, and thinking was something she had been doing ever since she had been brought aboard the human ship 2 days before. Whilst young for her kind, Benezia had raised her to be methodical and calculating in everything she did, and Liara had found at least one of those things to be useful enough to keep after finally managing to move away from her and onto her own things. Certainly her logical approach had helped in persuading the Solarian in charge of the Dagon theorem to allow her to be a part of the team, though given what happened that could be taken as both a good and a bad thing. I would also advise you do not show such excitement when Jane Taiko gets here. The Geth attacked a planet called Eden Prime which we helped clear before coming here. A lot of humans died in the attack. The words of young human soldier who had found and rescued her came to the forefront of her mind, something they had been doing a lot since they boarded the ship as she tried her best not to think about the rest of her captivity or the actions of the Krogan who had come with the Geth. She knew she probably owed him an apology for her ill choice of enthusiasm and words. He didn't seem to have mentioned them to his boss despite the fact that they could be taken as her supporting the Geth, though she had been umming and erring about how to do it. Human culture was something she was not particularly experienced in, having devoted herself to her Prothean research before humans even existed to the council races, and the extranet videos she had watched whilst she recovered hadn't helped much. Dr. Tizoni. Drawn from her thoughts by someone speaking behind her, Liara turned around hastily. How had she been so distracted that she hadn't noticed someone come in? Oh, I am sorry, Tali, wasn't it? I am afraid I was lost in my thoughts and didn't hear you come in. What can I do for you? The Quarian girl didn't seem too bothered by her social awkwardness. Thank the goddess. Her posture relaxed and friendly even as she replied. Not a problem, you have had a lot to think about, I am sure. I was just here to offer a tour of the ship. From the sounds of it you were going to be here a while. It certainly helped me settle in a little when I joined up. It was something that Liara had been wondering, how there were a group of aliens aboard a very human spaceship, but she had merely put it down as a specter thing until now. A tour? Are you sure that would be okay? I mean, given the commander's concerns. Jane Shepard, the first human specter, would normally have been a piece of living history that Liara would be dying to meet. The woman had been very professional, but Liara could tell she didn't trust her and probably wouldn't for some time to come. In fact, Liara was surprised she didn't have a guard following her at all times. She knew her extranet activity was being monitored and approved given how long some of the loading times were after all. Naruto has given you the all clear, and if he believes you so will Shepard, even if it is just provisionally. I just would make sure not to prove either of them wrong in that belief. The young human had such sway over a specter? She knew that Commander Shepard had checked her initial story with him before letting him out, and from what he said he had very good people reading skills, but she had barely spoken to the man since then. Such a level of trust made her wonder if she had significantly underestimated the man. Perhaps his claim about the number of Geth he had killed hadn't been an idle boast. Surprising, isn't it? Though when you get to know him a little better, I think you will come to understand why. Despite how he acts, he is quite brilliant in his own way. Now, shall we? Obviously her thoughts had been easier to read than Liara thought. A small blush rising on her face as she chose to ignore the first question and nod to the second, not trusting her voice in case she said something that could be interpreted badly. You're too kind, Tali-chan, though it's not going to get me to go any easier on you in training later. The rather amused voice of the subject of their conversation from behind Tali made both of them freeze up, though Liara was very glad she hadn't said anything now as she would probably be as embarrassed as Tali was. Naruto, what have I told you about sneaking up on me? Embarrassment was quick to turn into outrage for the Korean as she turned to face the new arrival, who seemed content just to ignore the hostility with his usual warm smile. Doesn't matter. Jane Tycho has said that the ground teams all need awareness training given the appearance of these new Geth. If they can sneak up on me, they can definitely do the same to the rest of you. Liara didn't know which new Geth type they were talking about, but she assumed it was an infiltrator, assassin class if it was using stealth. Sorry Mr. Uzumaki, I didn't manage to get your rank before, so I hope I don't sound rude. Are you here to escort us on the tour? This made more sense than just having two aliens walking a human ship by themselves, though Liara was surprised when Naruto shook his head with a small laugh. Call me Naruto Liara-san. I don't think my rank would translate very easily. I was actually on my way here from Jane Tycho to ask if you were still serious about wanting to join the ground teams. The fact that Naruto added small words after everyone's names still confused Liara, especially given that none of the other humans seemed to do it, but the fact that he was here about her admittedly on the spot offer was surprising. Well, yes, if the commander will have me, I would prefer to be doing something useful rather than stuck hiding on a ship out of harm's way. I thought the others were against it, saying that I didn't have any military training. Naruto nodded and gestured out of the room. You will have to come meet Narali-chan Liara-san. I think you and her would get along very well. And actually the others' concerns are the reason I am here. Jane Tycho has asked me to check your basic fitness and combat skills. If I think they are good enough, then there will be no problem. Liara couldn't help but grin at the opportunity to prove herself, as well as in thanks to Naruto for doing this for her. She had to admit there were not many that would even entertain the possibility of allowing a civilian to fight with them. And don't worry about it too much, as Tali-chan is also a civilian, she will be doing the training with you. Normally the possibility of having someone else there would be good news, as it meant she wouldn't be the only one embarrassed by whatever training she was put through, but judging by Tali's sudden stiffening and nervous posture, Liara couldn't help but feel even more ill at ease. Naruto, you've already seen me work, remember? I am sure you don't need me to do an actual training course beyond our normal training. Naruto's grin, along with Tali's rapid attempt to excuse herself, turned her ill at ease into actual concern. By the goddess, what was she getting herself into? $% carat and asterisk, and just a few more laps. Tali didn't ever think she could hate Naruto, not after he saved her life and helped her integrate herself into the crew, but as the boy turned around jogging on the spot in front of them, she found herself remarkably close to crossing that line. The training he had put her and Liara through had been absolutely grueling, making their close combat sessions look like a breeze in comparison. Her lungs on the verge of pulling her suit's air filter down her throat with the large ragged breaths she was being forced to take. She was doing better than Liara though. Obviously the young Asari had spent more time looking through dossiers and examining artifacts than training, bent double as she attempted to try and draw precious air into her lungs once more. Naruto, that is enough. The call from the entrance to the cargo bay, which had been converted into an impromptu assault course, alerted Tali to the presence of the rest of Shepard's team. Keela, if things weren't embarrassing enough with them not completing the training course, everyone had turned up to watch as well. Naruto nodded, the boy barely even sweating, before going over to grab a couple of bottles of water from near the start line of the assault course. They've passed Tycho. Certainly most of the academy graduates from when I graduated would have struggled to keep up with me for that long. The news surprised and cheered up Tali. She had honestly thought, given Naruto's lack of exertion, that they had failed, something that Ashley was quick to bring up. But you don't even look like you were trying, Naruto. Are you sure that you haven't gone easy on them? Ashley had been the most vocal in her concerns about the pair of them. Tali would have taken offense at that if she didn't know it was more about concern for their safety on the field than any kind of superiority complex. Ashley-chan, I don't think you could even make me work up a sweat before you passed out, though I am more than willing if you wish to try. There was silence for a moment. Even Tali had caught the possible double meaning to that sentence, and she was glad of her mask as the blood rushed back to her face. Naruto merely stood with a cheeky smile that made it clear he knew exactly how it sounded. Ashley seemed unsure whether to blush or get angry, which probably wasn't helped by Kaden and Rex's laughter from behind them. The commander merely chuckled for a moment before speaking. I assumed this was you taking it easy on them then? Perhaps you can run us through the advanced course then. Whilst Tali and Liara rest, we can run them through gun drills when we get back to the Citadel. The laughter stopped abruptly as Naruto's smirk returned full force, Garrus looking a little uneasy even as Naruto started moving around to alter some of the setup pieces of equipment. Commander, are you sure this is necessary? We are due into the Citadel in a few hours. Jane Shepard, Spectre and hero of the Human Alliance, merely grinned at the Turian's attempted excuse, and suddenly Tali got the rather smug feeling that she might yet come out best in this encounter. I am sure a little training won't do you any harm, Garrus. I did promise the executor that I would ensure you remained in peak physical condition after all. Now, let's start up with a gentle warm-up. Tali was distracted by Naruto appearing next to her, having just helped move the almost comatose Liara off to the side, gladly accepting his offer of a shoulder to help her shuffle off to where a small bed was set up amongst all the crates. Nearly there, Tali-chan. You did very well today, much better than I was expecting. Now you get to watch this lot have a go. 10 credits if I can make one of them cry. Tali smiled at his obvious attempt to distract her from her aching muscles, though she waved Naruto off when he tried to sit her down on the bed, running through a set of stretching exercises he had taught her. If she didn't finish properly, she wouldn't be able to walk in a few hours. Thanks, Naruto, though I will almost definitely hate you tomorrow for this. Kila, I am going to have to find a Quarian spa to get rid of all this sweat. Originally, upon joining the Normandy, Tali would have been horrified to have said such a personal thing in front of someone, whether she knew them or not, but Naruto had a way of making her comfortable with being honest about things. Well, if you want a massage, Tali-chan, that will probably help your muscles a little. Sakura-chan taught me how to do them. Naruto trailed off before shaking his head and waving. Whenever he brought up someone from his past, he tended to do this, though Tali wouldn't push for now as she tried to ignore the blush that rushed to her face at the rather personal offer. He let her have her secrets, she would let him have his, for now at least. Finishing the stretching for the moment, she sat down just as Naruto rejoined the group as they finished their warm-up laps of the inside of the assault course, taking them round to explain each exercise with a spring in his step she couldn't help but envy. Though from the slowly sinking faces on her comrades' faces, she definitely wasn't envying them right now. $% and asterisk Rex was a simple creature. To be honest, all Krogan were really. He knew what made him happy in life and didn't usually get interested in things that ranged beyond fighting, drinking and eating. Saving his people from their slow bitter extinction was a lofty goal in comparison, but Rex knew he hadn't thought too hard about how to do it. After all, if he had complicated things, the other Krogan would probably have gotten confused. So, as he stopped to regain his breath for the 8th time in the last 2 hours, he found himself surprisingly interested in the young human that had managed to run a team of trained killers into the ground. It wasn't even his fighting instincts screaming at him to fight for dominance of the pack. Those had been silenced when he had lost the contest on Theorem, as much as he complained about Naruto getting to run off first and get the advantage. This interest went deeper than that, to a level Rex had never really descended to before now. It wasn't just how the boy fought and how Rex could beat him, which was usually as far as Rex got with his acquaintances these days, as they all ended up dying off quite quickly anyway, but more trying to understand how he thought and why he was holding back so much. Come on, old man, you are already 10 laps behind me. The call reignited the fury that constantly hummed in Rex's blood, the insufferable brat finally breathing heavily as he jogged ahead of Commander Shepard, who was the only other member of the group still going. Be careful, brat, we Krogan may not have the best endurance, but we are natural sprinters. Very dangerous over short distances. Rex reinforced that with a biting motion as the boy moved past him again, Rex starting to jog again as Shepard caught him up, the normally unreadable woman scarlet in the face and obviously near the limit herself. She had really surprised him carrying on this long, though. She certainly had tenacity and stubbornness that would fit a Krogan quite nicely, unlike the other 3 who had dropped out in the first hour. Caden had gone first, his implants flaring up under the strain of the exercise. Then Ashley had twisted her ankle going over one of the obstacles, the woman more annoyed at herself for the injury rather than actually hurt by it. Garrus had lasted to the 50-minute mark before stumbling to a halt and ejecting his lunch off to the side of the assault course. Commander. Joker's voice broke through the air and Rex knew it meant they had probably arrived at the Citadel. Shepard slowing to a halt in front of him and giving him a good excuse to stop there. Whilst his aching limbs and burning lungs made him feel more alive than he had ever probably felt off the battlefield, Rex wasn't going to fall into the brat's trap and run himself into the ground to beat him. Yes, Joker? Talking into her calm meant that Rex didn't hear Joker's reply, but Shepard carried on a moment later. Thanks, Joker, we will be on station in 20 minutes. Team, gather round. The barked order showed that the prolonged training had not improved Shepard's mood, and having seen her deal with Fist, Rex was in no mood to be the one on the end of her ire this time. Rex cast his eye around as the other members of the strike force shuffled and groaned as they moved into position around him, chuckling to himself as Naruto walked over, still bouncing on the balls of his feet. Have to get you to do this again, brat, though next time we add some shooting challenges, then you will be in trouble. Despite his almost unnatural proficiency in close combat and endurance, Rex knew that Naruto was only a passable shot at best, so challenging him to a shooting contest was the best chance at getting back at him. No shooting, my ship. Whatever Naruto was thinking of replying was cut off by Shepard's glare, Rex managing to ignore the small feeling that he felt in the base of his stomach that usually only appeared when a Krogan female was brooding, though he decided not to push his luck just in case Shepard decided to break her own newly minted rule. Now, we are headed to the Citadel for resupply as well as to sell the other items we found. I am giving each of you 24 hours leave. She paused as everyone perked up at that, though Rex noticed her and the brat share a look which probably meant that she had something planned for him. The council may come across some new leads at any time though, so I need you all to be able to make it back to the Normandy at an hour's notice. Rex didn't think this would be a problem for this group. The only one who drank heavily was him, and he wasn't in a drinking mood right now. He was in more of a smashing things mood. That said, given what we have just been through, I suggest trying some of the Presidium spas, unless you want to spend the next couple of days wincing every time you stand up. Dismissed? Short and to the point. Rex did rather like that about his new employer, as well as taking him to some of the best fights in the galaxy. As the others all went their separate ways, Rex decided to see if he could help with whatever the commander had in mind for Naruto. Given what the brat seemed to get up to most of the time, it was almost certainly going to end up either pissing someone off or getting in a fight. And despite having done both more times than he could count, Rex knew there was nothing he enjoyed more. Barla Vaughn would be the first to admit that he led an easy life. Between his work for the Shadow Broker and his own financial dealings, there was very little in life that he wanted that he couldn't get. Nearly everyone had a price, and Barla was very good at working out what that was. As he found himself jammed up against the wall of his apartment, feet dangling almost 3 feet off the ground and flailing uselessly, Barla couldn't help but think he should probably have invested a bit more in his personal security systems for this particular circumstance. I have a trade for your boss, Lil Whelp. The deep and obviously distorted voice did little to improve Barla's rather flaky constitution, the skull mask facing him right now terrifying him to the point that his attempt to defuse the situation came out a mere squeak rather than his usual calm tone. Well sir, if you want to come by the office during the day, I would be happy to. Barla stopped with a breathy gasp as the man holding him slammed his fist into the wall next to Barla's head, denting the metal structure in a way that should not be humanly possible to achieve barehanded. This is more convenient and serves as the warning that comes with this trade. Should your boss try and fleece me, I think you know who I will start with showing my displeasure. One of the few dangers to working for the Shadow Broker was dealing with individuals like this, those more adept at solving arguments with guns and brute force rather than words and money. Of course, yes sir, perfectly clear. What is it you wish to trade with the Shadow Broker? Barla would definitely be hiring some bounty hunters to deal with this man. He refused to let himself get manhandled like this and then let the person get away with it, but if what he was offering the Shadow Broker was valuable, then the deal could still be made first. He was abruptly dropped to the floor with a thud, eyes taking in every part of his attacker that he could see for a description later. The man wore high-end armor that had obviously been custom-tailored with spikes and extra armor pads. The distinctive mask overlay on his helmet would make it easy to find the man in the street at any rate. The man brought out 2 data slates, throwing one to Barla dismissively. The identities of a large number of gang members and their associated businesses on the Citadel, protection rackets and other money-making activities. Browsing through the first few entries, to ensure its validity of course, Barla saw that whilst some of the information was already in their possession, this was quite a lot more detailed. Whilst we have some of this information, the rest of it is certainly valuable enough. What are you wanting in return for this information? And what is on the second slate? Barla wasn't dumb. The second slate was obviously meant to be an enticement for the first deal to be favorable. Credits, high-end weaponry, whichever is easier for me, make disappear into the wider market. Let's make it credits, then we can negotiate on this second slate, which contains the information of which gangs Spectre, Shepard and C-Sec are going to hit in the next 48 hours. Barla's eyes widened. The time frame was quite short, but several gangs on the first list had standing deals with him to buy information related to law enforcement activities targeted at them, meaning that the second slate was far more valuable than the first one he had been given. How do you claim to have such information? Breaching the Alliance network on that new prototype of theirs is no easy task. Breaking into C-Sec's mainframe was a lot easier, but Palin wasn't a fool and generally didn't release this kind of information electronically until an hour before they started breaking down doors, so a C-Sec leak was unlikely. Much easier if you just access the data in person. Physical security is actually a lot less robust than electronic on that ship. Was easier to get in and out of there than it was here. Something for him to note for later, Barla thought to himself. He had several contacts that were known as high-class thieves. Perhaps he could continue obtaining the information even after he killed off this annoyance. Well, I will be able to offer you 20,000 credits for the first data slate and 50,000 for the second one, which is very generous, I assure you. It was generous, for the first data slate at least. Normally he wouldn't even offer half that for information he had already read and had most of already. 100,000 for both and an agreed 10,000 credit fee to be deposited with one of my contacts for each attack I provide forewarning of from now on, per gang. Barla knew he could probably push for a better deal, but it was still less than half of what the gangs were offering, and he had no desire to have this man in his home another minute if he could avoid it. You push a hard bargain, sir, but I will agree. This chit has 100,000 on it plus a little extra as an incentive. How will you contact me if you have more information? Barla hoped that the man would be stupid enough to arrange a meeting point or give him an extranet address. Both would make tracking him and killing him that much easier for his minions. Don't worry, Rat, if I have more information, it will get to you, one way or another. Barla couldn't react in time to avoid the second data slate hitting him in the face as it was thrown in his direction, stumbling back against the wall in shock. Looking up, the man was gone, something Barla would have thought impossible given his heavy armor and build, but frantically casting his eyes around the room, Barla could see no sign of his assailant. With a weary sigh, Barla activated his comms unit to get the head of his security. His weekend lie in ruin, and now he would have to talk business before breakfast. Honestly, some people in this business were just barbarians. Line Break crouched in a roof vent just outside the large apartment Barla Von called home. The skull-masked figure chuckled darkly to itself for a moment before it shimmered and changed into the form of a familiar blonde ninja. Enjoy yourself there, Kyubi? Glad you listened to the no dismembering rule. The fox took a moment to reply, the deep mental rumble a moment later bursting with ill-contained glee. As if I would need to use physical violence against an insect like that. You give me no credit, brat, though your deviousness is impressive given your usual, holier-than-thou, attitude. I wonder what your beloved Taiko would think of you selling out part of her attack for mere money? It was an impressive attempt at a guilt trip, given that the fox liked to pretend he hated Naruto's attempt to be honest and helpful with those he considered friends. It's fine, I have clones watching all the locations I gave him, which are only the ones on our strike list, not C-Sex. We now get to see what they move, where they move it, and whether we can actually put a face to any of Barla Von's men that aren't just his hired thugs. The only issue might be Rex getting angsty, but from the sounds of it only a few of the gangs would be warned in time, so there should be enough trouble to keep the bloodthirsty Krogan happy. Whatever you say, brat, I wonder what your plan is for your newly gained ill-gotten gains. Whilst a nice sum for very little work, it is probably coded to given the mole locations where any money is spent. It was a good point, and Naruto had no delusions about the Volus and its undoubtedly quickly forming plans for revenge, which was why he already had a plan. Well, Kyubi, let's give him a trail of crumbs to follow then. Some of the people he sends after us might actually give you a challenge. That and have some good gear or bounties on them, though Naruto knew he would need to remind Kyubi not to kill them unless necessary. They were only doing their job after all, and he had definitely provoked Barla into putting out the contract. I doubt it, brat. Even with us trying to hide our abilities, I can outfight any of these Xenos, though Rex might be fun to challenge sometime. Now, what do we want to buy first? Naruto had a few ideas, though 100,000 credits wasn't actually an easy value to shift in bulk without attracting attention. How do you feel about buying some shares? There was at least one restaurant on the Citadel that he thought would do a lot better now he was around, especially if he kept using paying his tab as the price in any competition between him and the other Normandy strike team members. And the rest, well, he had a plan to get Barla sniffing around an area where his men would definitely stick out. Line skip. Here's your winnings, sir. Please have a nice day. The slightly forced smile onto the Flux Casino cashier's face just made Naruto smile even brighter under his hanged mask, having doubled the 30,000 credits he had originally exchanged for the casino's tokens in less than 2 hours. Now he had left Barla enough of a trail to make him think that his attacker lived in the area, visiting several shops and businesses near to the casino before using it in the casino itself. Now it was time for him to get back to Jane's tasks. Rex offering to give him a hand had been unexpected, but clearly the Krogan had been expecting trouble, which was why he offered. Naruto had switched out with a clone who was then going to check in with several of his other clones, both to avoid pissing Rex off by saying no and also to provide a seemingly legitimate route for him to obtain his information from. Given he hadn't received any memories, that was still going according to plan, so now he just had to find some trouble to keep Rex happy, and then he was free for the evening. Given the conversation he had heard between one of the waitresses and the man at the bar, perhaps another visit to Korra's den was in order. Line skip. Despite spending the afternoon in the spa, Jane couldn't help but regret trying so hard to keep up with Naruto during his training session. Each step was painful and her muscles made it clear that doing anything but gingerly walking back to the Normandy would get a mutiny from them. Still, it could be worse, she thought slightly amusedly to herself as she looked back to where Liara and Ashley were stumbling along, Ashley due to her injury and Liara due to her muscles seizing up after she had collapsed. Want a hand, Jane-chan? Turning to where Naruto had somehow appeared silently, Jane merely quirked an eyebrow in his direction, their agreed method of inquiring if he was the real one or not. Just finished with Rex and an issue in Korra's den, then a little bird told me some of my precious teammates were struggling with the aftermath of our light training. So I thought I should leave Rex to mop up the few remaining pieces of trouble in Korra's den and came to offer my assistance in helping you back to the ship. Whilst the initial statement had her anger rising given his mocking smile, the offer of assistance certainly seemed genuine enough, and he had used the code phrase to indicate he was the original. What happened in Korra's den? I thought you were just checking in on a few things before we took another mission. Given she wanted the others to catch up, Jane decided that distracting herself from the pain of standing was the best thing to do in the meantime. Just a C-Sec op that was about to explode in their faces, idiots were trying to use a civilian with no training or expertise to infiltrate an illegal gun mod ring. They didn't even shut her sister up from talking about it. Got the girl out, beat up those trying to kill her for being a snitch, and then had one of my contacts complete the deal for them. Naruto's irritation was understandable given his background. Naruto's ability to infiltrate places was one he was very proud of, and others' mockery of the art was one of the few points he really liked to gripe about. I bet you were going to get a nice little paycheck out of it though, so I wouldn't try and complain too much, Naruto. Now, as much as I would like to take it easy, I think Liara and Ash need your help considerably more than I do, Naruto. I was starting to worry Liara wouldn't make it back at all. The Asari perked up at the idea of help, though she looked a little confused when Naruto turned away from her and knelt down. He is offering you a piggyback, Liara. Not quite what I meant when I said help you, but I suppose it will speed us up. Jane was slightly surprised that Liara didn't know what a piggyback was. Maybe what she had been telling her of her childhood with Benezia wasn't exaggerated after all. Are you sure this is okay? I'm not sure about human customs and wouldn't want to give people the wrong idea. Obviously carrying someone around had a different meaning in Asari culture, or at least that's what Jane assumed from Liara's statement. Well, if you don't want the lift, Liara, I am sure that Ashley or I will take up Naruto's offer. Given how painful the journey had been thus far, Jane was more than slightly tempted to pull rank now she had made the initial offer. It would sure beat trudging back under her own power. So it is not at all due to the fact you want the opportunity to get a feel for those rock-hard muscles? Or to stake your claim before Liara gets any ideas? The sarcastic voice inside her head was the part of her that mentally said the things it wasn't acceptable to utter out loud, or at least it usually was. This was out of left field even for her. Oh, sorry, Commander, I didn't mean to offend. I was just curious about what people might assume. I think you are correct though, making it back without assistance may well be beyond me now. So if you are still willing, Naruto? The blonde nodded, to Jane's slight chagrin, and Liara hopped into place a moment later. No worries, Liara-chan. I imagine Tali-chan will probably need some help when she finishes with her spa as well, and we wouldn't want you injuring yourself before the next mission. Jane tried to ignore the slight blush on Liara's face as she wrapped her arms round Naruto's neck. Given the number of things that embarrassed or caught the young Asari off guard, it probably wasn't even related to the current situation. Keep telling yourself that, hun. Though I reserve the right to say I told you so when you actually get jealous later. Normally Jane found her inner's comments amusing or very astute, but now she was just wishing she had told the shrink about it all those years ago. She knew it wouldn't let this little fantasy go for some time. Jane-chan? Are you okay? Naruto's call drew her from her rather one-sided internal argument. Jane quickly realizing she was frowning rather intensely in his direction, not exactly a good facial expression to be using despite her annoyance. Yes, I am fine, Naruto. Though next time I am pulling rank, and the time after and so on, Jane thought as the quartet started moving down the street once again, not realizing the slightly sadistic grin she was now sporting would probably disturb Naruto even more than the frown had if he happened to notice. Lines of text from reports across the galaxy flittered across the screens in front of him, filtered and condensed by his most trusted agents, allowing him to understand the top level of what was going on within his organization. You called for me? The accent would have given the approaching person away even if she had tried to hide her distinctive walking pattern. Miranda Lawson, a beautiful sight to behold even as she stopped 10 yards from him and stood to attention, her face set in the calm facade she liked to present to the world. I did. Did you view the file I sent you? The report on this Naruto Uzumaki had of course been classified to the highest level within Alliance Command, but that just meant that it took his agents a little longer to pass it along to him. Of course, though I question the validity of it, which I imagine you foresaw given we are meeting now. Despite the fact she could and often did use subtlety and manipulation when talking with others, Miranda was one of the few trusted to enter his inner sanctum. There was a level of trust there that most would be unable to fathom for such an organization. Of course. I could have just forwarded these to you, but I felt the tactical assessment could come from you in person. With a wave of his hand the video stream started, what little security footage left on Eden Prime that his operatives could salvage, the arrival of the Normandy on the Citadel and the fight that went with it and so on. As you can see, the report's indications of Uzumaki's ability to duplicate himself are not as far-fetched as first is to be believed, which given how suspicious he seemed at first points to other skills he is no doubt still hiding. Tactical assessment. Whilst he had already made his own assessment regarding the boy, It was always interesting to hear how the minds of his subordinates worked. Tactically, probably about average for his age, the boy seems to just spam his duplicates and send them in en masse. That does point to this ability being one that does not strain him overtly, or that he is so used to the strain that several dozen clones are not a problem for him now, meaning that in terms of physical threat I would put him on the same level as one of our sweep teams. Interesting, lower than he had put the boy, but he supposed she didn't have all the data and it was closer to his assessment than Kai's was. And knowing you as I do, Operator Lawson, you want to know why I have brought this to your attention given the stand down and evacuate order that I have given regarding humanity's new Spectre and her crew. Not exactly a leap of logic. Whilst Uzumaki's abilities fascinated him, Miranda was currently running a dozen other teams for him and a bit too busy to just summon over in order to show off his new find. I wouldn't question your reasons, sir. His abilities would make him quite the asset if he was properly trained. Please don't tell me you called me to get me to seduce him. Whilst there were many distasteful things Miranda had done for him and Cerberus, she had made it clear that sleeping with people for the job was a line she wasn't going to cross, and he couldn't help but respect her for that. Of course not. If the reports of his training as a shinobi are even remotely accurate, he would see that coming a mile off, though given all of our data has come from the boy himself thus far, I imagine everything we know has to be taken with a large spoon of salt. My point is that he is entirely new to the galaxy as a whole, meaning that he has no preconceived notions of us or Cerberus as a whole, certainly not the usual drivel that is fed to the masses by the Alliance spin doctors. Something he would have loved to rectify if he had the time and resources, but humanity's future was far more important than his personal reputation. So you wish for me to make contact with him and act as a diplomat to Cerberus? He nodded silently, allowing Miranda to then continue speaking. I will need to pass some of my operations to other operators. If I am going to the Citadel, I will not be able to manage them effectively. The elusive man nodded. He had expected this request even as he summoned her. Send me the details. I will run the operations in your absence. It has been some time since I have been into the field after all. And there was rarely a better opportunity to remind some of his lower-level employees that he was actually real. Not merely a shadowy figure that haunted their minds when they were behind on reports. He was a people person after all. Of course, anything else? It was only slight, but he allowed himself a small upturning of the corners of his mouth as Miranda once again proved much easier to anticipate and understand than she would want, the feeling of satisfaction disappearing moments later as he nodded and held out a small electronic device. Yes, there is one thing I think would be advantageous to us, both in understanding Uzumaki and also in getting us information on the Spectre's progress outside of what she reports to the Council. Given my orders, we will need to hire someone in from the outside to infiltrate the ship and plant this in the main data core, who I leave up to you, though if they could also nab any medical records on Uzumaki whilst they're there, that would be beneficial. He knew who she would think of first. After all, it would be the same person he had thought of, but the illusion of independent thought was important to make his people feel valued. He couldn't do the thinking for them all the time now, could he? Dismissing Miranda in his best attempt at a civil and warm manner, he turned back to the screens and began to actively focus on the data. He might have missed something after all, and that just wouldn't do. Interesting. The single utterance was the only indication he gave of his mental processes as he read the bounty contract from the Citadel, put out by Bar Levon for a skull-mask-wearing mercenary, last seen in Flux, concluding from the information in the contract that this was the Uzumaki in disguise. After all, who else could dent steel with just a punch, then disappear before Barla had a chance to call his hired cronies? If the boy did allow Miranda to talk him into supporting their cause, he was definitely going to have to teach him a lot more about subtlety. Given my agents only knew where C-Sec would be targeting and your targets were the ones that were cleaned out, Commander, I wouldn't be looking at me like that. That was a point, and given Jane's startled glance over to him, Naruto got the feeling she hadn't realized that either, so she was now going to be paranoid about them being spied upon or betrayed. Naruto would tell her eventually, probably when he had done something useful enough that she wouldn't get overly angry, but the money had been far too useful in addition to ignore. The fact that it wasn't in either his or Jane's account meant it wasn't going to be tracked by the Council either, which given his clones were still having to distract some of their agents when they were on the Citadel was a foregone conclusion. We can look into it after this, Tycho. We haven't been the most cautious when speaking over the comms after all. It had been a security flaw that Naruto had already noticed with his comrades back on Therum, but it was a good enough excuse to distract Jane for now. Still, the fact that those areas were cleared means that the gangs will have been forced to reorganize in a hurry. This may actually help my agents in the long run with infiltrating their networks. So Commander, in regards to payment. Naruto zoned Palin out at this point as memories suddenly appeared in his head. Obviously one of his scouts had found something. His eyes widened even as he could suddenly hear the high-pitched whining noise getting steadily louder and louder, shifting forwards as fast as he could to throw both Palin and Jane against the nearest wall with one hand. his left hand wrenching the executor's table from its floor, mounting despite his muscles screaming protest at the stress such an action put them under. He wouldn't be able to shift himself into position in time, that much he knew for certain as he shifted the table so that it would provide a modicum of cover for the two still recovering commanders. Kyuubi. The fox would know what was up, even when the Biju was sleeping. The thing's danger sense was attuned to the point that Naruto was surprised the warning hadn't come from the fox, but even when the beast was being friendly, he often had to be firm to get his requests heard. Sigh, fine brat, but this is going to hurt a lot. Make sure you find who did this afterwards. I want to make them suffer more. Naruto felt the Kyuubi's chakra encircle him just in time, the sight of the missile impacting against the bulletproof window of the executor's suite the last thing he saw before he turned, ducked his head and closed his eyes, the world exploding in pain and fire around him moments later. Kyuubi's chakra didn't protect him as such, certainly not in the same way that his kinetic barriers tried for a moment before failing dramatically, but that wasn't why Naruto had asked for some of the monstrous power. Instead it deadened the pain and replaced it with anger, regenerating his body even as shrapnel and fire attempted to end his life, meaning that as the blast subsided he was up and moving towards the now gaping hole in the ambassador's building. Someone had just tried to kill him and Jane Chan, and he was going to find out who and why before he let the pain overcome him. Line break. Jane's head was still ringing from the explosion as she forced herself to her feet, her concern for Naruto far outweighing the unpleasant feeling that came with her inner ear still recovering from the blast. Given the lack of a body or any blood, she was confident that he had survived, but that merely meant he was probably off doing something stupid again, such as chasing after the one who fired the missile. Commander. Palin's call went ignored as Jane rushed to the window, easily spotting her crew member as he darted through the rapidly gathering crowd and towards the other side of the Presidium. Unfortunately, whilst Naruto could just shrug off a 3-floor drop after a rocket attack and then just run off like nothing had happened, Jane wasn't so indomitable. So quickly checking that the executor was okay, which he was apart from a few scratches, Jane made her way to the door as fast as she could. It took her 2 precious minutes to fight her way to the building's entrance, and another 30 seconds for her to make the crowd part in front of her to allow her through, meaning that the slowly returning sounds of gunfire and fighting that she could hear had faded away by the time she had crossed the large bridge that bridged the 2 main sides of the Presidium. Naruto. Naruto, where are you? The first sign she had to follow was a dead Solarian mercenary, gaping chest wound, making it clear that Naruto had reverted to his spear rather than bothering with the pretense of guns anymore. The trail of blood worried her though, obviously a sign that Naruto had been injured in the fight or had in fact not come out of the rocket attack unscathed. 2 more corpses were visible leading up through the small marketplace, and Jane quickly confirmed that they were the same group as the first, one of them probably their attacker given the rocket that was lying next to him with the main body of the weapon reduced to little more than scrap metal. The thrum of a skycar had Jane jump and raise her shotgun. It took off from in front of her to the left, in the same direction as the blood trail. It accelerated away from her too quickly for her to do anything about it though, and heading in that direction she laid eyes on the sort of scene you would see in a horror movie. Naruto. Naruto. Her companion was barely able to stand, his weight resting heavily on his spear and the wall, armor cracked and scorched from the heat. Huh, oh hi Jane Chan. Could you give me a hand? I'm feeling a little. And then he fell sideways, making Jane's heart freeze in her chest for a precious moment before she rushed forwards whilst activating her earpiece. Normandy, Naruto is down in the Presidium and we have been attacked. Alert everyone and get them back to the ship now. Whilst she would have preferred to have the rest of them come back her up, only Naruto and herself were probably still armed and armored given they had finished their raids hours ago. More concerningly with this attack, and something that was preying was just her paranoia at this stage, was that if she and Naruto had been the target, then they probably weren't the only targets the assassins would have in mind. Line break. Ashley knew she was being followed. 3 heavily armed and armored mercenaries were not very good at blending into such a crowd on the Presidium at the best of times, and had done her best to surreptitiously shake them for the last 5 minutes or so. However, given the crowded streets, she couldn't afford to be too obvious about such an attempt. If the assassins had explosives or heavy weaponry and decided to open up, the collateral damage could be. The sound of an explosion caused her to pause in her thinking as the crowd started to panic, concerned that the explosion was related to her pursuers rising as the 3 of them started to close in on her a few moments later, meaning she had to make a rather hasty decision. Pushing through the crowd towards a small side street, Ashley regretted the decision to wear her casual uniform out on her little shopping spree. It meant that she only had her pistol and nothing in the way of armor to speak of. Shaking her head to clear her mind before she started telling herself off for being unprepared, Ashley ducked into the side street that contained several doorways and items that she could hide behind or in if she really needed to, though they would be the first places the mercenaries would look for her, no doubt. With only a few moments before the mercenaries reached the entrance to the alley, Ashley saw what she was looking for and gave a small smile even as she started running towards it. The first mercenary arrived a few moments later, shotgun up and ready as he scanned the alleyway, though he didn't enter until the other two arrived several seconds afterwards. The three of them were obviously more than the usual rabble they had to deal with then, calm and disciplined even as they moved down the alley slowly, covering each other as they checked every doorway and hiding spot. Where is she? The third mercenary, a young human armed with an assault rifle, was obviously the least experienced of the group as he broke the silence first. Either she managed to fool us into thinking she went down here, or she is still hiding somewhere down this alley. Neither outcome is helped by your speaking human. The Turian who had been leading the group spoke with a dismissive and abrasive tone, that either implied he hated the human for his inexperience, or merely the fact that he was human. Quiet both of you, one more sweep and then we get out of here. Her head isn't worth us being caught by C-Sec. Perched on top of the little overhang above one of the doors, barely risking breathing in case they heard her, Ashley was glad that she had seen Naruto use this little trick earlier during the raid on the gangs. For a moment she thought that she would get away with it, with the mercenaries passing underneath her without comment, when suddenly her comms activated. Whilst not loud enough to give her away directly, Ashley knew it would be enough to make the mercenaries suspicious and lead to her discovery, meaning that she swung into action even as Joker's voice filled her ear. Alert! Normandy crew under attack on the Presidium. All crew to report back to the ship for security reasons immediately. Even as Joker finished speaking, Ashley leapt down and slammed the heels of her feet into the human's unarmored head, sending him crumpling to the floor even as she continued to fall, raising the pistol so that it was pressed directly into the Turian's chest. Firing 3 rounds at that range, where his kinetic barriers couldn't activate due to the proximity, took the Turian out before he could even react, body flying back into the wall as Ashley tried to swing her pistol round to deal with the Asari. However, her last opponent was prepared, knocking her pistol aside with her free hand and raising her own, though thankfully Ashley grabbed the arm and managed to force the muzzle away from her. Then the Asari's eyes glowed blue and Ashley felt the biotic lift take effect, the Asari managing to free her arm as Ashley tried to bring her gun to bear in 0G. You have skill, I will give you that, human, though I suppose it did not matter in the end. Saren paid us to send the new Spectre a message, and your body will do nicely. The Asari raised her pistol once more, only for a noise to cause her to jerk in its direction. Naruto stood at the entrance to the alley with a grim look on his face. Another of our targets, I will enjoy my pay after all of this. The Asari fired 3 times, Naruto dodging each shot even as Ashley felt the lift's power begin to fade. Shifting as the lift failed entirely, Ashley took advantage of the last few moments of weightlessness to swing her body so that her legs could push off the wall behind her, sending her careening into the Asari and causing them both to tumble to the floor. Not giving the Asari any respite, Ashley let her anger at the fear she had felt in the lift take control, unleashing a flurry of vicious punches into the Asari's face and upper torso. Ashley, that's enough. Naruto's call, followed by his firm grip a few moments later, brought her back to her usual self, though given the bloody mess that her opponent's face had been reduced to, their newly acquired prisoner wouldn't be talking anytime soon. It's okay, Ash, it's okay. As Naruto pulled her off the Asari and into an embrace, Ashley realized she had begun to cry, the hot tears slipping down her face as the adrenaline faded and she realized quite how close she had been to dying and being unable to do anything about it. Thanks, Naruto, but I am okay, honest, just the shock. Not that I am ungrateful, but how did you end up being in the perfect place to distract her? She had a suspicion as to why Naruto had been there, which was bolstered by the slightly awkward shrug the ninja used to try and avoid the answer, but she wouldn't press. The boy, or at least his clone, had just saved her life with his arrival. Given that she would forgive him a little spying, stalking, especially because the commander almost definitely already knew about it and could well have ordered it, Naruto's earlier comments about a little bird, telling him things making a lot more sense now. I won't press Naruto, though you should probably work on a more reasonable excuse, in case you have to step in for one of the others. I'm certain Tali might get the wrong idea about her white knight. It wasn't hard to tell the Quarian had feelings for their ninja, though as he blushed through a stuttering denial Ashley could see why. He definitely had his heart in the right place if nothing else. Maybe next time she wanted some shore leave she could have him accompany her rather than guard from afar? Would definitely make his life easier, and he definitely wasn't the worst person she could be seen with at dinner. Line break. It had been pandemonium on the Citadel since the attack almost 36 hours beforehand, an assassination attempt on both the C-Sec executor and humanity's first Spectre in broad daylight, making every news broadcast and communications briefing that Jane had heard. Even the council had been forced to weigh in and assign 2 other Spectres to assist in the investigation. Jane knew the real reason for the added Spectre presence, serving to both pacify an alarmed populace and also to minimize the impact she could have on the investigation. Honestly, she didn't mind overly much. Her main source of information was lying unconscious in front of her, so it wasn't like she would have been very productive anyway. It wasn't as if vengeance hadn't already been dealt, The boss may be injured, but Naruto's clones were quick to act. More than a dozen mercenaries found either dead or crippled with bounty information on her, and her crew easily found on their bodies. The warning was obvious, even as C-Sec interrogated her entire crew to try and find out who was responsible for the killings, and would hopefully put off any further attacks in the near future. You do know I can't stand gloomy girls, right, Jane-chan? Did I miss something whilst I was out? The scratchy and weak voice dragged Jane's attention to the deep blue eyes of the man who had probably saved her life for the third or fourth time now, a smile coming unbidden to her face even as she did her best to glare at him. You mean apart from Ash almost getting assassinated, someone shooting a rocket at us and you getting blown up? Her voice was a little louder than she had intended, and Naruto's guilty wince made her feel a little bad, but then a determined look crossed his face and he raised a still bandaged arm. What was I supposed to do, Taiko? There wasn't any time after getting you and Palin into cover. Jane was about to object that he didn't need to protect her like that, but Naruto shook his head even as she opened her mouth, obviously guessing what she was going to say next. And yes, it is better that I got hit than protecting myself first rather than you, Jane-chan. The only person who can probably take an explosion like that better than me is Rex, and even he would have been down and out after that one. With my unique abilities, it's better that I. Jane didn't realize that she had let her anger get the better of her until it happened, the slap connecting and sending Naruto's head reeling before she embraced him in a hug. Don't you dare. Do you realize we thought you were going to die? Doing her best to get a grip on her emotions, Jane pulled back and fixed Naruto with a direct gaze. I understand what you mean, and I know you are right that you can survive more than I can, but that doesn't mean that we should just accept that should be the way things happen. You are too important to all of us for you to keep trying to get yourself killed. Ah, now if you could only admit that you are angry because you care, and that you have barely left his bedside for the last 2 days, we might actually get somewhere. Her inner voice would normally have ruined her mood, but for once Jane didn't actually feel the need to try and disprove or ignore the points it had made. Hi, you aren't the first one to tell me that, Jane-chan, but I don't really know any defensive jutsu other than just cloaking myself in chakra. There wasn't really much time for structured learning after the invasion. Despite the initial claims Naruto had made to Anderson and the council, Jane was getting the feeling that he hadn't been anywhere near as proficient a ninja as he had claimed, especially with things like this. Well, can we work on creating some then, Naruto? Because whilst I do not know jutsu, there are enough biotics on this ship that you could modify your abilities to act like theirs for the time being. Certainly the biotic barrier that they all learn would improve your defenses. As Naruto's face lit up, Jane decided she didn't care though. He had his rights to secrets just as she had hers. Making new jutsu? That will be so cool. Maybe I could make it bigger. And as Naruto started to brainstorm in his usual manic manner, Jane felt relief start flooding her system. At least the explosion didn't seem to have done any lasting damage that she could tell. Naruto, we can work on it later with Kaden. For now I better go tell the others you are up. A certain engineer has been very concerned about your well-being. She moved away, ready to stand and head for the door, when Naruto did something unexpected. Rather than be embarrassed about her inference to Tali's crush on him, which was so obvious now even he would have trouble missing it, Naruto instead frowned before a blue wave of his chakra erupted from his body. The wave flowed through her and the walls moments before the alarms started blaring throughout the ship. Commander, energy readings just went through the roof. Trying to pinpoint where it came from in case it was Geth in. Jane cut off Joker's report even as Naruto suddenly shifted out of bed, summoning his spear to help him stand. Joker, the readings came from our acid. Stand down. Looking across at Naruto, who was throwing on his normal clothes as fast as he could, Jane couldn't help but be slightly concerned as he asked a rather out-of-place question. Jane, where are we? His tone was strangely demanding and fierce, Jane quickly opening up her omnitool as she replied. We have just taken orbit over a planet named Pharos. There were reports of a Geth attack on the colony and it is as good a lead as any in regard to Saren. Opening the small galactic map on her screen, Jane showed Naruto where it was in comparison to where else they had been. We were about to launch a ground team when Dr. Chakwas said you might be waking up. Naruto nodded and then pointed towards the door. No time to waste then, we need to get down there now. Normally Jane didn't mind Naruto's little quirks and changes in personality, but this was too different to normal for her to just ignore. Naruto, you've just woken up from being sedated for 2 days, and now you want to join the boarding party despite the fact your armor is in pieces. She grabbed his arm and made him turn to face her, his eyes studiously avoiding meeting her own. You're hiding something, and I won't have you endangering the mission or yourself by trying to keep it from us. There seemed to be something of an internal struggle inside Naruto's head for several moments before he sighed and gestured down and to his left. I can sense chakra, Jane-chan. It is very weak, but I can feel it down there. It is one of my friends. It has to be the end. Thanks for watching. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.